I wasn't supposed to be home that night, but there I was, frozen outside my father's study, listening to my own parents casually discuss throwing me out like garbage 1 week before Christmas. "We need Ryan back," my mother said, her voice cold and calculated. "He's family. She's expendable." She. Not even my name. 28 years of being the dependable daughter, the one who actually built something reduced to a pronoun. All for Ryan, my brother, the golden child who'd burned through opportunities like matches, now crawling back after his latest failure. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pulled out my phone and recorded every word. Christmas night, I came home to my belongings, dumped in the driveway like trash, my parents watching from the window with Ryan smirking beside them. My mother didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. So I smiled, loaded my car, and drove away from the life I'd known forever. They thought I was broken. They had no idea what I was building. 4 months later, Ryan lost a $50 million deal, one that would have saved the family company I'd helped grow from nothing. Now my phone won't stop ringing. They're not just asking for help. They're begging. And here's what they don't know yet: I already own them. Stay until the end, because what I did next will leave you speechless. This is the story of how the expendable daughter became the one holding all the cards, and trust me, I played them perfectly. My name is Elena Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've been the Vice President of Operations at Mitchell & Associates, the commercial real estate firm my parents built from the ground up. I thought loyalty and results mattered in this family. I was wrong. December 20th, 10:47 p.m. I was the only one left in the building, which wasn't unusual. The cleaning crew had already made their rounds, leaving behind the faint scent of lemon polish and the hum of the HVAC system as my only companions. My office overlooked downtown the city, lights twinkling like scattered diamonds, and spread across my desk were the Q4 reports I'd been analyzing for the past 3 hours. The numbers told a story I'd written with 70-hour work weeks, missed birthdays, and sacrificed weekends. My branch had increased revenue by 42% this year. $8.5 million in pure profit. I'd personally closed the Global Tech Industries account, a $15 million development project that would carry us through the next 2 years. I'd mentored struggling branch managers, restructured our client retention program, and implemented systems that reduced operating costs by 18% across the board. I saved those reports to email my parents, then stopped myself. What was the point? Last quarter, when I'd presented similarly stellar numbers, my father had nodded absently and said, "That's what we pay you for, Elena." My mother had spent the entire meeting on her phone, but when my brother Ryan had shown up 20 minutes late reeking of scotch, they'd applauded his dedication for even attending. Ryan, the golden child, 2 years younger than me, effortlessly charming and catastrophically incompetent. His branch had lost $2.3 million this quarter alone, not due to market conditions or bad luck, due to sheer negligence and arrogance. 3 months ago, he'd lost the Johnson account, a steady $500,000 annual contract we'd held for 6 years. The client had been furious, forwarding me emails where Ryan had missed deadlines, made inappropriate jokes, and ultimately told them to take their business elsewhere if they were going to be so demanding. I'd tried to salvage the relationship. I'd called personally, offered discounts, proposed new terms. Mrs. Johnson had been kind but firm. "Elena, you're exceptional. But we can't risk working with a company that puts someone like your brother in a leadership position. It reflects poorly on your judgment as an organization." That should have been Ryan's wake-up call. Instead, he'd hired his college roommate Derek as a senior manager, despite Derek having 0 industry experience. Within 6 weeks, Derek had embezzled $75,000 and disappeared. The police investigation was still ongoing. Ryan's staff turnover rate had hit 60%, 4 times the industry standard, because he routinely showed up late, left early, and blamed his team for his failures. I'd offered to help, multiple times. I'd sent him templates, connected him with mentors, even offered to sit in on his client meetings. Each time Ryan had responded with barely concealed hostility. "Stop trying to make me look bad," he'd said during our last conversation. Just because you have no life outside work doesn't mean the rest of us have to be workaholics. 2 weeks later, I'd overheard him telling our parents I was sabotaging him by stealing his potential clients. Never mind that those clients had approached me directly after Ryan had botched their initial consultations. In every family meeting, our parents made excuses. The market's been tough on Ryan's territory. He's dealing with unfair competition. These things take time. When I presented solutions or pointed out patterns, my mother would sigh and say, "Not everyone is as naturally gifted as you, Elena. Show some compassion." Compassion. As if compassion meant watching the company bleed money while pretending incompetence was just a different work style. December 23rd arrived with freezing rain and the kind of gray sky that matched my mood perfectly. I'd planned to head to my parents' house around 7 for Christmas Eve preparation. My mother always insisted on elaborate decorations and homemade cookies, traditions I'd participated in since childhood, despite them feeling increasingly hollow. I arrived early, just past 6, hoping to help set up before the chaos began. My key still worked in the front door. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon, and I could hear voices coming from my father's study down the hall. I recognized both my parents' voices, tense and low. I should have announced myself. Should have called out a greeting. Instead, something in their tone made me pause, my coat half off, listening. "We have no choice." My father's voice was strained. "Ryan's branch is hemorrhaging money. If we don't act now, if we can't show the board a turnaround plan in Q1, the whole company goes under. The banks are already asking questions." "Then we remove Elena from her position." My mother's voice was cold, matter-of-fact. "We transfer her branch to Ryan, give him a fresh start with a proven system." Silence. Then my father, quieter. "But Elena built that branch from nothing. Those are her clients, her relationships, her systems." "Exactly, which means Ryan can't possibly fail with those advantages. And Elena is so talented, if we give her Ryan's branch, she can fix it. She's always rising to challenges. This is just another opportunity for her to prove herself." My hand tightened on my coat, the fabric crumpled in my grip. "Ryan needs this, James. He's our son. He's struggling and we have the power to help him. Elena will understand, eventually." I stood frozen in that hallway, ice spreading through my veins. They weren't just going to take credit for my work. They were going to give my entire branch, my clients, my team, my $8.5 million in profit to Ryan, and saddle me with his disaster, his failure, his mess. Frame it as an opportunity. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and started recording. Christmas Eve would decide everything, and I already knew their decision. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling with my phone clutched in my hand, that recording playing on loop in my mind. Every word my parents had spoken felt like a blade cutting away the illusion that hard work and loyalty meant anything in this family. Christmas Eve morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through frost-covered windows. I could hear movement downstairs, the clatter of dishes, my mother's voice calling out instructions for breakfast preparation. For a moment I considered not going down, considered packing my things and leaving before the charade began. But I needed to see this through. I needed to know exactly how far they were willing to go. The dining room table was set with my mother's good china, the Christmas dishes with holly patterns around the edges. My father sat at the head of the table reading something on his tablet. My mother was bringing out platters of food, her movements precise and controlled. Everything looked normal. Picture perfect. Then Ryan arrived. His eyes were red and puffy, his face blotchy in a way that suggested he'd been crying for hours. He moved slowly, like someone carrying an enormous weight. My mother immediately went to him, wrapping him in her arms. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured. "Come sit down. Have some coffee." Ryan sank into his chair, and I watched him carefully. There was something performative about his misery, the way he made sure everyone could see his distress before he even spoke. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've been up all night just thinking about everything." My father looked up, concern etched across his features. "What's wrong, son?" Ryan glanced at me, then quickly looked away. The gesture was deliberate, calculated. I didn't want to say anything. I kept telling myself I was wrong, that I was being paranoid, but... He pressed his hands to his face. "I think Elena has been sabotaging me." The words hung in the air like poison gas. My mother's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. My father's expression shifted from concern to something harder. "That's a serious accusation," my father said, but his tone suggested he was already half convinced. "I know." Ryan pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I didn't want to believe it either. She's my sister. But look at these emails. He turned the screen toward our parents, swiping through messages. I recognized them immediately, correspondence from months ago, when Ryan had asked me to share my client retention strategies. I'd offered to teach him, to walk him through my process, but I'd refused to simply hand over proprietary documents I'd spent years developing. "She said I need to figure it out myself," Ryan said, his voice breaking. "Every time I asked for help, she turned me down. She made me feel stupid for even asking. And when I tried to implement my own strategies, she went behind my back to my clients, offering them better deals to make me look bad." "That's not what happened," I said quietly. My mother's eyes snapped to me, cold as January ice. "Then what did happen, Elena?" I opened my mouth to explain, but Ryan cut me off, his voice rising with emotion. "She told me I was incompetent, that I didn't deserve my position. She said I was riding on the family name while she did all the real work." "I said you needed to take responsibility for your branch," I corrected. "After you lost the Johnson account because you told them to take their business elsewhere." "See," Ryan gestured at me wildly. "She throws my failures in my face. She's been building a case against me for months, documenting every mistake, every struggle. I think she wants to push me out so she can take over the whole company." My father rubbed his temples. My mother stared at me like I was a stranger who'd invaded her home. "We need to discuss this privately," my mother said, standing abruptly. "Ryan, come with us." They disappeared into my father's study, leaving me alone at the Christmas breakfast table. The food grew cold. An hour passed, then another. I could hear the murmur of voices, Ryan's occasionally rising with emotion, my mother's responding in soothing tones. When they finally emerged, my parents' faces were set in identical expressions of grim determination. Ryan's eyes were dry now, his jaw clenched with something that looked like satisfaction. "We've decided to have a family meeting tonight," my mother said. Her voice carried the formal distance she used with difficult clients. "After Christmas dinner, we need to discuss your future with the company. Not our future, not the situation, my future. As if it were already decided. As if I were already gone. Don't I get to explain my side?" I asked. "We've heard enough for now," my father said, not quite meeting my eyes. They left to go Christmas shopping, the three of them together, leaving me in that big house with its festive decorations and hollow traditions. I stood in the living room surrounded by wrapped presents and twinkling lights, feeling like a ghost in my own life. My phone buzzed. A message from Jamie Chen, one of the HR managers I'd worked with on the restructuring project. The subject line read, "You need to see this." The attached emails made my blood run cold. 3 months ago, Ryan had contacted an outside consultant specializing in corporate transitions. His question, "How do I document a case for removing a hostile family member from company leadership?" The consultant's response was clinical, methodical. Build a paper trail over several months, frame their independence as non-cooperation, document every instance where they refuse requests, even reasonable refusals. Create the narrative before making accusations. By the time you present your case, the pattern should be undeniable. Ryan had followed the playbook perfectly. Every email request I'd declined, every boundary I'd set, every time I'd insisted he learn. Rather than simply copying my work, he'd documented it all, twisting each instance into evidence of hostility and sabotage. I scrolled through months of correspondence. This hadn't been a breakdown. This wasn't a desperate brother finally voicing his hurt feelings. This was a carefully planned assassination. And I'd walked right into it. Christmas dinner was a masterpiece of tension. My mother had prepared all the traditional dishes, honey-glazed ham-roasted vegetables, her famous cranberry sauce, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. We ate in near silence, only the scrape of silverware against china breaking the quiet. Ryan kept his eyes down, playing the wounded party. My father's jaw was tight. My mother's movements were brittle, precise. At 8 o'clock exactly, my father pushed back from the table. "Let's convene in my study," he said. Not a suggestion, a command. The study felt different tonight. My father and mother positioned themselves behind the massive oak desk, a united front. Ryan took a chair to the side, a box of tissues conspicuously placed on the table beside him. I was left to stand in front of the desk like a defendant awaiting sentencing. My father opened a leather portfolio and pulled out several typed pages. Prepared notes. This wasn't going to be a conversation. "We've received serious concerns about your conduct," he began reading in the formal tone he used for board presentations. "Multiple instances of refusing to collaborate with team members. Hoarding proprietary resources and systems, creating a hostile work environment for your sibling through constant criticism and undermining behavior." "That's not accurate." I started, but my mother's hand came up sharply. "We're not here to debate, Elena. We're here to inform you of our decision." The words hit like a physical blow. A decision. Already made. This wasn't a meeting. It was a verdict. "You don't want to hear my side at all?" I asked. "We've heard plenty," my mother said coldly. "From multiple sources. The pattern is clear." I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking slightly. "Then you need to see these emails. From 3 months ago, Ryan contacted a consultant asking how to build a case to remove me. He's been manufacturing evidence, twisting every interaction." Ryan's gasp cut through the room. "You've been spying on me." His voice rose with genuine-sounding shock. "Going through my private communications." "I didn't go through anything. HR sent me." "This is exactly what I mean." Ryan stood up, his voice breaking. Tears streamed down his face. "You can't respect boundaries. You can't let me have any privacy. Everything has to be about control with you." My mother's face transformed into something I'd never seen before, pure disgust directed at me. "Your jealousy of your brother has become toxic, Elena. Genuinely disturbing." "These were sent to me by Jamie Chen from HR," I said desperately. "I didn't hack anything. Someone thought I should know what Ryan was planning." My father held up his hand, his expression hard. "Enough. Your behavior tonight proves everything we've heard. You're so obsessed with undermining your brother that you've somehow obtained his private correspondence and you're trying to twist it into some conspiracy against you. It's not a twist, it's right there in black and white." "Enough!" My father's voice thundered through the study. Ryan sank back into his chair, shoulders shaking with sobs. When my parents' attention shifted to comfort him, his eyes met mine for just a fraction of a second. The tears were still there, but beneath them was something else. A flash of triumph, a smirk so brief I almost thought I'd imagined it. "Gotcha," his expression said. My father waited until Ryan's crying subsided before continuing. "We've made our decision. Effective January 1st, Ryan will take over management of your branch. You will assume control of his branch." The room tilted. "You're giving him my clients, my team. Everything I built. You'll have the opportunity to prove you can fix what you claim to be able to fix," my father continued as if I hadn't spoken. "You'll have 6 months to turn the branch around, to demonstrate the skills you claim to have." 6 months. To fix a branch that Ryan had spent years destroying, to rebuild relationships with clients who'd already been burned, to motivate a demoralized staff with a 60% turnover rate and an embezzlement scandal still under investigation. The setup wasn't just unfair, it was designed for failure. "And if I can't perform this miracle?" I asked quietly. My father didn't answer directly, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Termination. Removal. The end. My mother leaned forward, her voice sharp. You'll also issue a formal apology to your brother, tonight, for your behavior, your hostility, and your attempts to sabotage his career. I looked at Ryan, at his red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, at the performance he'd perfected, then at my parents sitting in judgment like I was a stranger who'd betrayed them rather than the daughter who'd sacrificed everything for their company. The family I'd loved, the people I'd worked myself to exhaustion for, had never really existed. Or perhaps they had, but only when it was convenient, only when I was useful. No, I said. The word fell into silence. Excuse me. My mother's voice was ice. I won't apologize for things I didn't do. I won't participate in this fraud. You haven't asked a single question about my side of the story. You haven't looked at a single piece of evidence that contradicts Ryan's narrative. You made your decision before I ever walked into this room. My father's face darkened, his hands flattening on the desk. Then you're choosing to remove yourself from this family. Not from the company, from the family. I stood there looking at the three of them. My father, who'd taught me to read financial statements when I was 12. My mother, who'd once told me I could accomplish anything. My brother, who'd learned that charm and tears could erase any accountability. No, I said quietly. You already made your choice, and it wasn't me. I turned and walked out of that study, leaving the door open behind me. I drove aimlessly for 2 hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The streets were empty, most families already tucked inside their warm homes for Christmas Eve. Snow had started falling, around 10 light flakes that caught in my headlights like tiny ghosts. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house another minute. Around 11, I turned onto my street. The renovated guest house where I'd lived for the past 5 years sat at the back of my parents' property, connected by a stone path I'd helped my father lay when I was 16. I'd stayed there even after I could afford my own place, telling myself it was practical, that aging parents might need help, that family meant being close. Something was wrong. Even from the street, I could see dark shapes scattered across the front lawn. My foot hit the brake instinctively, and the car slid slightly on the fresh snow before stopping. I sat there, engine idling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I pulled into the driveway slowly, my headlights illuminating the scene in horrible detail. Cardboard boxes split and collapsing, their contents spilling into the snow. My clothes, professional blazers and wool coats, lay crumpled in the slush like discarded rags. Framed photographs face down in frozen puddles. My laptop, the one with 8 years of work files and personal documents, shoved carelessly into a black trash bag that had torn open. They hadn't just kicked me out of the company. They'd thrown me out of my home. I got out of the car, my legs unsteady. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees and the wind cut through my coat. I walked across the lawn, picking up a picture frame. The glass was cracked. It was a photo from my college graduation, my father's arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning. I set it down gently and moved toward the guest house door. The key didn't work. I tried it 3 times, jiggling the handle before the reality sank in. They'd changed the locks. On Christmas Eve. While I was sitting in that study being tried and convicted, someone had been here, throwing my life into garbage bags and changing the locks on my home. I knocked, then knocked harder, then pounded with my fist until my hand ached. No lights came on in the guest house, but I could see lights in the main house, warm yellow rectangles against the snowy darkness. I called my mother's cell phone. It rang once, then went to voicemail. Blocked. I tried my father's. Same thing. Ryan's number did the same. The snow was falling harder now, accumulating on my shoulders, melting into my hair. I walked to the main house and knocked on the front door. Knocked until my knuckles were raw. 20 minutes passed. My feet went numb in my dress shoes. Finally, the porch light flicked on. The door opened 6 inches, the chain lock still engaged. My mother stood there in her burgundy Christmas robe, the one I'd given her 3 years ago. Her face was composed expression hard as carved marble. "Mom, please," I said. "It's freezing. Can we just talk?" "You made your choice," she said. Her voice was flat emotionless. "You chose pride over family. This is the consequence." "It's Christmas Eve. It's 28 degrees. My things are scattered in the snow." "You should have thought of that before disrespecting your brother and this family." She paused, and when she spoke again, her words were carefully enunciated, like she wanted to make sure I heard every syllable. "You're not our child anymore, Elena. You're just someone who used to live here." The words hit harder than the cold. "Dad," I called past her. "Dad, please." I could see him at the top of the stairs, a shadow in his pajamas. He stood there motionless. The man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stayed up all night helping me with my business school applications, who'd called me his little warrior when I'd landed my first major client, he couldn't even look at me. "Dad." My voice cracked. He turned and walked away, just turned his back and disappeared down the hallway. My mother reached outside the door and picked up 2 large black garbage bags I hadn't noticed. She thrust them toward me. "We packed essentials. The rest will be donated. Don't come back." "Mom, please." The door closed. The lock clicked. The porch light went dark. I stood there, 2 garbage bags at my feet, staring at the wreath on the door with its cheerful red bow. Through the front window I could see the edge of the Christmas tree, its lights twinkling in steady, peaceful rhythm. Movement caught my eye. An upstairs window, my old nursery, the room that had been mine until I was 7 when Ryan was born, and needed it more. Ryan stood there, backlit by soft yellow light, his phone held up, recording this, documenting my humiliation for posterity. He made a little wave, fingers wiggling. "Bye-bye." Then he pulled the curtain closed. I dragged the garbage bags to my car, threw them in the trunk, and sat in the driver's seat. I turned the heater on full blast, but I couldn't stop shivering. Up and down the street, every house glowed with warmth. Through windows, I could see Christmas trees, families moving around in pajamas, the intimate comfort of people who belonged somewhere. I sat there for an hour watching my parents' house. At one point, my mother passed by the living room window carrying a tray of cookies. Normal, peaceful, like nothing had happened, like I'd never existed. Around 1 in the morning, something inside me crystallized. The grief and shock began hardening into something else, something cold and focused. I pulled out my phone and opened my voice memos. The recording from last night was still there. My parents discussing how to steal my branch. I had the emails Jamie had sent documenting Ryan's calculated campaign. I had 8 years of stellar performance reviews and financial records. And I had something they'd underestimated. I had nothing left to lose. I started the car and pulled out of the driveway, leaving 30 years of memories behind a locked door. I walked away with nothing but a promise to myself I would rise. And they would fall. I spent Christmas night at a motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and cigarette burns in the carpet. Through the thin walls, I could hear a couple arguing, a television blaring someone's music, thumping bass notes that rattled the headboard. I sat on the scratchy comforter with my laptop open, staring at apartment listings until the numbers blurred together. On December 26th, I started calling landlords. Every decent apartment required first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. The cheapest options ran $4,500 up front. I checked my savings account balance for the 3rd time that morning, as if the number might have changed. $3,217. That was it. 8 years of 70-hour work weeks, and I had $3,000 to my name because I'd been paying off student loans aggressively and covering house repairs for my parents. Last summer, I'd paid for a new roof on the main house. $12,000. I'd written that check without hesitation because family helped family. The memory tasted bitter. I found a studio apartment in a neighborhood where broken bottles glittered on the sidewalks and chain-link fences enclosed weedy yards. $650 a month, The landlord, a tired woman with kind eyes, didn't ask many questions when I explained I could pay 3 months up front but needed to move in immediately. She handed me the keys on January 2nd. The apartment was 300 square feet with water stains on the ceiling and a bathroom so small I had to step into the hallway to fully open the door. I bought a futon from Facebook Marketplace for $80 and had the seller help me carry it up 3 flights of stairs because the building had no elevator. Those 2 garbage bags my mother had packed became my entire wardrobe. I hung my work clothes in the tiny closet and stacked everything else in a corner. For the first week, I ate instant ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. The grocery store 2 blocks away sold bread for 99 cents and off-brand peanut butter for $2. I calculated every expense down to the penny-downloaded budget app set spending limits that made my chest tight with anxiety. The public library became my second home because the Wi-Fi was free and the heating worked better than my apartment's rattling radiator. I started walking the 3 miles to the office to save on gas, leaving my apartment at 6 in the morning when the streets were still dark, and arriving with my feet aching and my breath visible in the cold air. It was humbling, humiliating. Some mornings I wanted to stay in bed and pretend none of this was real, but I got up anyway. I refused to let them break me. The one advantage I had, the single piece of leverage that kept me afloat, was buried in a contract I'd signed 3 years ago. When my parents had officially made me branch manager, they'd insisted on an employment agreement. At the time, I'd thought it was a formality, a sign of professional growth. Now I understood it was protection. The contract stipulated a 90-day termination notice requirement and explicitly stated that termination could only occur for cause, which required written documentation of performance issues and an opportunity to remediate those issues. They couldn't fire me without breaching the contract. Not until March 31st. Ryan was furious when he learned this. I heard through Jamie that he'd stormed into the corporate attorney's office demanding immediate termination, only to be told that firing me prematurely would expose the company to a wrongful termination lawsuit. My parents were stuck with me for 3 more months, and I intended to make every day count. I continued managing my branch remotely, maintaining client relationships through phone calls and video conferences. My team was confused by the sudden tension in the family but remained loyal and professional. We hit our January targets. Our client retention rate stayed at 94%. I documented everything meticulously, every successful deal, every positive client interaction, every metric that proved my competence. If they wanted to build a case for termination, I was building an even stronger case for my value. On January 10th, I hired a moving company to retrieve the rest of my belongings from the property. My parents weren't home. I'd timed it deliberately calling during the Wednesday morning, when I knew they'd be at the monthly Rotary Club breakfast. The movers loaded boxes from the storage area of the guest house while I supervised checking off items on my inventory list. In the back corner behind Christmas decorations and old furniture, I found a banker's box labeled in my mother's neat handwriting, "Family Documents, 1998. Something made me grab it, carry it to my car, and tuck it in the trunk before the movers finished loading their truck. That night, sitting on my futon with a peanut butter sandwich and cheap tea, I opened the box. Old tax returns yellowed and crisp, property deeds for houses they'd sold before I was born, bank statements from accounts that no longer existed. I almost set it all aside as irrelevant when I noticed a sealed manila envelope at the bottom. The address was written in handwriting I didn't recognize, sent to my mother at an address I'd never heard of. I didn't open it. Not yet. Something about it felt too significant to rush. Instead, I picked up the 1999 tax return, curious about nothing in particular. My eyes scanned the itemized deductions, mortgage interest, charitable donations, medical expenses. Then I saw it. A line item for legal fees. $15,000 paid to Family Law Services, with a notation in the margin, adoption finalization. I was born in 1998. I read the line 3 times, my sandwich forgotten in my lap. Adoption finalization. The words didn't make sense at first, then made too much sense all at once. I grabbed the 1998 return, searching for similar entries. There it was again, $12,000 to Adoption Services of Massachusetts. My hands started shaking. I set down the papers and stared at the sealed envelope at that unfamiliar handwriting addressing my mother. Why had they never told me? Why had they hidden this in a storage box like a shameful secret? And suddenly the cold distance, the way my mother looked at me with something that wasn't quite love, the way my father couldn't meet my eyes. It all took on a different shape. Maybe this wasn't just about Ryan being the favorite child. Maybe there was something deeper, something they'd buried 30 years ago and never intended for me to find. There were files hidden in those boxes, files with my name on them. And something told me they held the answer to why I was never enough. For 4 days, that sealed envelope sat on my futon like a living thing. I'd pick it up, turn it over in my hands, then set it down again. Part of me knew that once I opened it, something fundamental would change. The story I'd told myself about who I was would have to be rewritten. On January 16th, after another dinner of ramen noodles and the suffocating quiet of my studio apartment, I finally slid my finger under the flap. The envelope contained official documents, the paper thick and formal. An adoption decree from the County Family Court, dated March 12, 1998. The language was dense with legalese, but certain phrases jumped out at me like they were written in neon: termination of parental rights, legal guardianship transferred, name change authorized. My hands trembled as I found the birth certificate. Original birth certificate, it specified at the top. Mother's name, Catherine Ann Morrison. Father's name, Robert James Chen. The child's name, the name I'd carried for the first weeks of my life, Morgan Chen. Morgan, not Elena. I whispered it aloud, and it sounded like a stranger's name. Beneath the legal documents was a handwritten letter on cream stationery, the ink faded, but still legible. The date at the top, March 1997. A full year before I was born. Katie, it began, and I recognized my adoptive mother's handwriting immediately younger and less controlled than the precise script I'd grown up seeing. I know this is what you wanted before you. I can't believe I'm writing this. I can't believe you're asking me to do this. But I promise I'll love your baby as my own. I'll give them everything you would have given them. I'll tell them about you when they're old enough to understand. You'll never be forgotten. I swear it. Love always, Diane. I read it 3 times before the full meaning settled into my bones. Diane wasn't just my adoptive mother, she was my aunt. Catherine Morrison had been her sister. My biological mother had died, and her sister had taken me in. This wasn't a stranger adoption. This was family, taking care of family. I sat there on my futon as the radiator clanked and hissed, watching shadows move across the water-stained ceiling. Everything I'd believed about my life was reorganizing itself into a new configuration, and the picture it formed was heartbreaking in its clarity. The emotional distance that had defined my childhood suddenly made horrible sense. When Diane looked at me, she didn't see her daughter. She saw her dead sister. Every time she'd commented on my eyes, saying, "You have Catherine's eyes," with that catch in her voice I'd never understood she'd been looking at a ghost. Every milestone I'd reached, first day of school, high school graduation, landing my first job, had probably reminded her of everything Catherine would never experience. I'd spent 32 years thinking I wasn't good enough, that if I just worked harder or achieved more, I could earn the kind of love she gave Ryan so freely. But Ryan was her biological child. Ryan didn't carry the weight of grief and loss every time she looked at him. Ryan was her fresh start, her real child, the one who let her be a mother without the constant reminder of death. It wasn't my fault. That realization should have brought relief, but instead, it brought a different kind of devastation. I'd never had a chance. I'd been fighting an impossible battle from the moment I was born. I felt relief and rage in equal measure. Relief that my inadequacy hadn't been inherent, that I hadn't somehow failed to be lovable. Rage that they'd never told me that they'd let me suffer through decades of confusion and self-blame when the truth would have at least given me understanding. The weekend became a blur of research. I made instant coffee in my apartment's tiny kitchenette and sat with my laptop searching for pieces of a history I'd never known existed. Catherine Morrison's obituary appeared in the archives of the local newspaper dated April 3, 1998. Catherine Ann Morrison, age 22, died unexpectedly on April 2nd due to complications during childbirth. A bright light taken too soon. Katie was known for her infectious laugh, her passion for art, and her generous spirit. She is survived by her sister Diane Morrison Chen and brother-in-law James Chen. She was predeceased by her parents Eleanor and James Morrison. A private service will be held for immediate family. Complications during childbirth. She died bringing me into the world, and there was no mention of a baby surviving, as if I'd died with her or never existed at all. I searched for Robert James Chen next, expecting to find little. Instead, I found everything. He was the CEO of Chen Industries, a commercial real estate corporation worth an estimated $200 million. His company specialized in sustainable urban development with projects across the Northeast. His professional headshot showed a man in his 50s with dark hair graying at the temples, sharp eyes, and a serious expression. I studied his face looking for pieces of myself. The shape of the jaw, maybe. The set of the shoulders. A Forbes article from 2010 profiled his philanthropic work. Chen has donated over $15 million to educational initiatives in the past decade, focusing particularly on scholarships for students who have experienced family loss. When asked about his motivations, Chen becomes uncharacteristically emotional. "Everyone deserves access to opportunity," he says, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Colleagues speculate this commitment stems from a personal loss in his youth, though Chen declines to elaborate. A personal loss. Had he known about me? Had Catherine told him she was pregnant before she died? Or had he been shut out entirely? Never knowing he had a child living 50 miles away, I found his corporate office address easily. Chen Industries was headquartered in the financial district in one of those glass towers that reflected clouds and sky. He'd been that close this entire time. While I was growing up feeling like an outsider in my own family, my biological father was building an empire an hour's drive away. The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. Did he know Catherine had been pregnant? Had he wanted to be involved? Had Diane and her husband kept me from him deliberately? Or had he known and chosen not to disrupt his life with an inconvenient child? I wasn't their child. I was their obligation. A promise made to a dying sister, a burden carried with increasing resentment as the years passed and Ryan arrived to show them what real parenthood could feel like. And somewhere out there, my real father was living a life that should have included me. The adoption papers went into a folder I kept under my futon, but I didn't have time to dwell on family secrets. I had a branch to run and a contract that protected me until March 31st. If they wanted me gone, I was going to make them regret it. January became the most successful month in my branch's history. $1.2 million in revenue, 40% above our target. I worked from my studio apartment laptop balanced on my knees, video calls scheduled around the hours when my neighbor's music was quietest. My team never saw the ramen cups stacked in my sink or the futon that doubled as my couch and bed. They saw results. The Technova Systems deal closed on January 28th. 3-year contract worth $2 million total. I'd been cultivating that relationship for 8 months, meeting with their VP of operations every few weeks, learning their pain points, customizing proposals to match their exact needs. When I presented the final terms over video call, their CEO smiled and said, "Elena, you're the only person who actually listened to what we needed instead of trying to sell us what you had. That's why we're signing." My success came from a leadership philosophy I'd developed over years. Hire talented people, trust them to do their jobs. Create a culture where collaboration mattered more than ego. My team knew about the family situation by now. Office gossip traveled at light speed, and someone had seen my belongings on the lawn Christmas night. Instead of pitying me, they rallied harder. Marcus, one of my senior account managers, pulled me aside after a team meeting in late January. "Elena, I just want you to know if you ever start your own company, I'm coming with you. Half the team feels the same way." I thanked him throat tight and told him I appreciated the loyalty, but wasn't going anywhere yet. But his words planted a seed I wasn't quite ready to examine. February stayed on track for $1.4 million. My clients were happy. My team was motivated. Despite everything happening in my personal life, I showed up to every meeting professional, focused, and competent. No one would have guessed I was walking 3 miles to work and eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. Meanwhile, Ryan's implosion was spectacular. He'd taken over my old office and immediately begun putting his stamp on things, as he announced in a company-wide email. He changed processes I'd spent years refining because this is how I want it done. When my former team members tried to explain why certain systems existed, he told them he wasn't interested in Elena's outdated methods. 3 of my best people quit within 2 weeks. I heard through back channels that they'd tried to push back on Ryan's changes. Tried to advocate for clients who were getting frustrated and been told to fall in line or leave. They chose to leave. By February 15th, the numbers were damning. Branch revenue down 25% compared to the previous year. 3 clients lost, including Patterson Industries, who'd filed a breach of contract lawsuit after Ryan promised deliverables his team couldn't possibly meet. HR complaints had tripled. People were reporting hostile work environment, unprofessional conduct, and complete lack of leadership. The failing branch I was supposed to fix, the one they'd threatened to saddle me with Ryan, was supposed to be managing that too, but he'd ignored it completely. It was hemorrhaging $300,000 a month, and he hadn't implemented a single corrective measure. Combined in just 6 weeks, Ryan was responsible for nearly $4 million in losses. The board meeting on February 10th should have been a reckoning. I still held my board seat per my employment contract, so I sat at that polished conference table while the financial officer presented the quarterly projections. The contrast between my branch's performance and Ryan's disaster was impossible to ignore. The numbers glowed on the projector screen in red and green, a visual representation of competence versus catastrophe. My father cleared his throat, his face carefully neutral. "Obviously, these are concerning figures. But we need to consider external factors. The market shifted significantly after the holidays. Consumer confidence metrics are down across the sector." I'd reviewed those same market reports. The sector was actually up 3%. Ryan jumped in, his voice defensive. "Plus, my branch only does well because I inherited Elena's client relationships and groundwork. She's just maintaining what I built." I stared at him. The lie was so blatant, so easily disprovable, that for a moment I couldn't find words. I'd built those client relationships from scratch. Many of them had never worked with Ryan at all. Some had specifically requested not to work with him. My mother nodded sympathetically at Ryan. "We need to give you time to adjust to these new responsibilities. Leadership transitions are always rocky. You're doing the best you can under difficult circumstances." I pulled out the restructuring plan I'd prepared. 10 pages of detailed analysis, specific action items, projected outcomes. I've identified the core problems and created a roadmap to address them. If we implement these changes immediately, we can stop the bleeding within 60 days and return to profitability by Q2. My father glanced at it briefly. "We'll take it under advisement." Under advisement. Corporate speak for no. "The company is losing money at an unsustainable rate," I said carefully. "If these trends continue, we'll be facing serious financial trouble by summer." "Thank you for your input, Elena," my mother said, her tone dismissing me like I was a junior associate instead of the person who'd just delivered record revenue. "We'll discuss this internally." The meeting adjourned. I gathered my materials, slowly watching board members file out. My parents stayed behind, talking in low voices with Ryan near the coffee station. I was almost out the door when I heard my mother's voice louder than she'd intended. "Don't worry, sweetheart. By April, Elena will be gone, and we can tell everyone the losses were their fault." I stopped walking. Ryan's response was quieter, but I caught the smug satisfaction in his tone. I pulled out my phone and added a new note to the file I'd been building. Feb 10, overheard mother and GC planning to blame company losses on me after termination. They could lie to themselves all they wanted. They could deny reality until the company literally collapsed around them. But the numbers didn't lie. Financial records, client contracts, employee testimonials, email chains, board, meeting minutes. I was documenting everything. And I was keeping receipts. I spent the night of February 15th working on something I knew was probably futile, but my conscience wouldn't let me ignore. Despite everything they'd done, I couldn't watch the company collapse without at least trying to help. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was a last grasp at the family I'd once believed in. But I had to try. The strategic plan took me 12 hours to complete. 20 pages of detailed analysis, specific action items with timelines, process improvements drawn from 8 years of experience, client retention strategies that had proven successful in my own branch. I outlined exactly how to stop the hemorrhaging in both struggling branches, which vendors to renegotiate with, which client relationships needed immediate attention, which employees were flight risks who needed retention conversations. Everything I would do if given the chance, laid out step by step. On February 16th at 9 a.m, I sent the email. Subject line, proposal for branch recovery, no strings attached. I addressed it to my parents and Ryan, but I also CC'd my lawyer. I'd learned that much at least. Everything needed to be documented now. The email was professional, careful, stripped of emotion. I know we have family differences, but I don't want to see the company fail. I'm offering this help freely with no expectation of recognition or reward. If you implement even half of these suggestions, you'll see measurable improvement within 30 days. Let me know if you want to discuss implementation strategies or if you have questions about any of the recommendations. I reread it 3 times before hitting send, searching for anything that could be misconstrued. It was clean, straightforward. An olive branch extended with open hands. Part of me hoped that this might be the turning point, that seeing my continued professionalism despite their cruelty might make them reconsider. That maybe, just maybe, putting the company ahead of personal grievances would remind them of the values they'd once claimed to hold. I should have known better. The response came on February 18th at 11 o'clock at night. Not from my parents, but from Ryan. And he hadn't just replied to me. He'd forwarded my email to the entire board and every member of the leadership team. His message began, "Everyone needs to see what Elena is really doing." I read it standing in my kitchen, my phone screen casting blue light across the dark apartment. This email is a perfect example of Elena's ongoing harassment and attempts to undermine my leadership. She's trying to make me look incompetent by offering help, publicly, knowing I'll refuse so she can claim I'm difficult to work with. This is calculated hostile workplace behavior and emotional manipulation. I've tried to work with Elena as family tried to be patient with her jealousy and need for control. But this proves she's more interested in making me fail than in company success. She's creating a paper trail to use against me, documenting my failures so she can push me out and take over. This is textbook workplace bullying, and I won't stand for it any longer. Every single point was twisted. My professionalism became calculation. My offer to help became sabotage. My silence during their attacks became evidence of manipulation. He'd taken my attempt at reconciliation and weaponized it. I scrolled through the responses that had already started coming in. Several board members who didn't know the full history were expressing concern. This does seem inappropriate given the circumstances. Perhaps HR should mediate this situation. We can't have family drama affecting company operations. I wanted to scream. I wanted to send my own email to everyone laying out the truth with documentation and evidence. But my lawyer had warned me about this exact scenario. Don't engage publicly. Let them destroy their own credibility. Your time will come. On February 20th, a courier delivered a certified letter to my apartment. The return address was Morrison & Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the state. My hands shook as I opened it. Cease and desist notice. The header read in bold capitals. You are hereby notified to immediately stop all contact with Ryan Mitchell, including but not limited to emails, messages, workplace communications not directly required for business operations, and any attempts to offer assistance or otherwise involve yourself in his branch operations. This behavior constitutes harassment and hostile work environment creation under Massachusetts employment law. Further contact will result in legal action for workplace harassment and immediate termination from Mitchell and Associates without cause. Additionally, you are prohibited from discussing branch performance financial metrics or company strategy with any board members or employees outside your direct reports. Any violation of these terms will be considered a material breach of your employment contract and grounds for immediate dismissal without severance or benefits continuation. The letter went on for 3 pages, each paragraph more threatening than the last. They'd hired a firm that charged $800 an hour to silence me. I called my lawyer immediately. He read through the letter while I waited, hearing him make small sounds of disapproval. It's intimidation, he finally said. Legally, this is weak. They're claiming harassment, but offering a business plan isn't harassment. You could fight this and probably win. But Elena, fighting it will cost you $50,000 minimum in legal fees. Maybe more if they really dig in. And you don't have that kind of money right now. So what do I do? You comply. You document everything. You keep doing your job perfectly. And you wait. Your contract expires March 31st. That's 5 weeks away. Don't give them any ammunition between now and then. I thanked him and ended the call, then sat on my futon staring at the legal letterhead. My parents had spent thousands of dollars on lawyers to threaten me, to ensure I couldn't even try to help save their company. They'd rather pay a high-powered law firm than accept a free strategic plan that might actually work. The family I'd loved was truly gone. Maybe it had never existed at all, not in the way I'd believed. I'd been the ghost of Catherine Morrison, an obligation they'd resented, a reminder of loss they couldn't escape. And Ryan was their real child, the one they'd protect at any cost, even if that cost was the company itself. I folded the letter carefully and added it to my growing file of documentation. Every email, every financial report, every piece of evidence of their decisions and my competence. I was building something, though I didn't quite know what yet. Fine. I'd tried to save them. I'd extended mercy when they'd shown me none. I'd offered help and been threatened with legal action. I wouldn't make that mistake again. I'd save my mercy for when they came begging for it. And they would. March arrived with the knowledge that I had 31 days left. 31 days until my contract expired and they could finally cut me loose without legal consequences. The cease and desist letter had made their intentions crystal clear. But if they thought I was going to spend my final month defeated and silent, they'd severely underestimated me. I couldn't directly recruit employees or discuss company strategy outside my branch. But I couldn't control who came to me. Jamie from HR appeared at my apartment on March 3rd, long after business hours. She looked nervous, kept glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be following her. I need to show you something, she said, pulling a folder from her bag. I can't give you these officially, but you need to know. Inside were copies of 15 formal complaints filed against Ryan in the past 6 weeks. Hostile management, verbal abuse. One complaint detailed a sexual harassment joke he'd made during a team meeting that had crossed every professional line. Another described him throwing a stapler at an intern who'd made a minor formatting error. HR wanted to investigate, Jamie said quietly. I personally recommended a formal review process. Your parents shut it down, said Ryan was under stress and these were just employees with grudges. I photographed every page while Jamie waited, then handed them back. She squeezed my hand before leaving. Whatever you're planning, I hope it works. On March 10th, Marcus Chen, one of the senior account managers from Ryan's branch, submitted a transfer request to work under my management. Ryan denied it immediately, but Marcus quit instead. His exit interview was supposed to be confidential, but somehow a copy found its way to my email inbox 2 days later. I've worked in commercial real estate for 18 years, Marcus had told HR. I've never encountered a manager as incompetent and vindictive as Ryan Mitchell. He blames everyone else for his failures and treats staff like personal servants. When I tried to prevent him from making a decision that would cost us the Meridian account, he told me I was insubordinate and threatened to fire me. I can't work for someone who values ego over results. The only reason that branch hasn't completely collapsed is because people like Elena Mitchell built systems that were resilient enough to survive his mismanagement. For a while. The Meridian account was worth $300,000 annually. Ryan lost it 2 weeks after Marcus left. On March 18th, Linda Kowalski invited me to lunch. Linda had been the company controller for 20 years, a quiet woman in her 60s who knew every financial detail of Mitchell & Associates. She'd watched me grow up, had taught me how to read balance sheets when I was still in high school. We met at a diner far from the office. She ordered coffee and barely touched it. "I can't talk officially," she said, her voice low. "But I've seen things in the books that concern me. Expenses that don't make sense. Vendors I can't verify. Your parents have told me not to ask questions, but Elena, I've been doing this too long to ignore red flags." She leaned forward. "Watch the Q1 financial report carefully when it comes out. The numbers aren't adding up, and I think you need to understand why." I thanked her and she patted my hand. "You're a good person, better than this family deserves." While I was building quiet alliances internally, I was also solidifying relationships outside the company. David Park from Global Tech called me on March 7th. "Elena, I need to be honest with you. We're frustrated with the new leadership at Mitchell & Associates. Ryan Mitchell has been unresponsive to our requests, and when he does respond, he's dismissive. We're considering ending our contract when it comes up for renewal in June, unless we can work exclusively with you." Sarah Chen from Technova expressed similar concerns. "Your professionalism is the only reason we're still working with your company, but we need consistency and competence. If things don't change, we'll have to explore other options." I asked them both to wait until April before making any final decisions. They agreed, but I could hear the hesitation in their voices. I was running out of time to save accounts that represented millions in revenue. On March 20th, I had coffee with Robert Morrison, an old family friend who'd become a partner at Redwood Capital, a mid-sized investment firm specializing in commercial real estate ventures. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and he'd reached out after hearing rumors about my family situation. "I've heard things," he said carefully, "about what's happening at Mitchell & Associates. Elena, if you ever want to go independent, my firm invests in talented operators. We'd back you. Seed capital, office space, whatever you needed to get started." The offer was tempting in a way that surprised me, but I wasn't ready for that. Despite everything, some part of me still hoped to save the family company, not destroy it. "I appreciate that, Robert. Really. But I'm not there yet." "The offer stands," he said. "When you're ready." Knowing I had that option was powerful. It meant I wasn't trapped. It meant whatever happened next, I had a path forward. On March 15th, a package arrived at my apartment with no return address. Inside was a manila envelope containing printed expense reports from Ryan's branch spanning the past 18 months. Certain items were highlighted in yellow. $45,000 in client entertainment at luxury restaurants. I cross-referenced the dates with the CRM system printouts that had been helpfully included. None of these dates matched actual client meetings. Many were on weekends or late nights when the office was closed. $30,000 in business travel to Las Vegas, Miami, and Cancun. Every trip showed Ryan traveling alone. No meeting notes, no client interactions documented, no business purpose whatsoever. $15,000 in office equipment purchases from a vendor called Apex Solutions. I searched for Apex Solutions online. The company didn't exist. The invoices were fabricated. $90,000 in what appeared to be personal expenses charged to the company. This wasn't just poor management or nepotistic protection. This was embezzlement. I later discovered the package came from Jamie, though she never confirmed it directly. I took the documents to a bank the next morning and locked them in a safety deposit box. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. I need a recommendation for a private investigator, someone discreet and thorough. He gave me a name. I hired her that week with instructions that were simple. I need a complete background check on Ryan Mitchell. Financial history, employment history, legal issues, everything. I don't know what you'll find, but I need to know it all. She told me it would take 3 weeks. I had exactly that much time before my contract expired. My final month at Mitchell & Associates wasn't spent defeated or cowering. I was building something they couldn't destroy: loyalty from people who'd seen the truth, evidence that would protect me from their lies, and options that meant I'd never be powerless again. Let them think I was defeated. Let them count down the days until they could finally be rid of me. I was just getting started. April 3rd brought the Regional Business Leadership Conference, an annual event where commercial real estate firms across the Northeast gathered to network and discuss industry trends. Mitchell & Associates had sent representatives every year for 2 decades. It was tradition, a demonstration of industry presence and stability. I'd considered not attending. My contract had expired 2 days earlier, and technically I was no longer employed by the company. But my registration had been paid months in advance, and I'd committed to speaking on a panel about client retention strategies. I honored my commitments even when they were inconvenient. Ryan was there too. I saw him across the conference hall on the first day, surrounded by a group of younger professionals holding court with the charm he deployed so effortlessly in public. I avoided him successfully for most of the event, attending different sessions, eating lunch in my hotel room, keeping my distance. On the evening of April 4th, I made the mistake of going to the hotel bar. I'd spent the day networking. My feet ached from professional heels, and I wanted one quiet drink before heading upstairs. The bar was dimly lit, nearly empty at 9:30 on a Wednesday night. I'd been there maybe 10 minutes when Ryan slid onto the stool next to mine. He was drunk. Not stumbling drunk, but loose and reckless in the way that meant he'd had at least 4 drinks. His tie was loosened, his eyes slightly unfocused. "We need to talk," he said. "We don't." I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop me. "Don't you want to know why they never loved you?" The words hit like ice water. I froze, staring at him. Ryan smiled, reading my reaction correctly. "I figured it out when I was 16. Found the adoption papers in Dad's safe when I was snooping for money. Took me a while to understand what I was reading, but once I did..." He laughed, a bitter sound. "Everything made sense. You're not even really family, Elena. You're the pity case they took in because Aunt Katie died, the obligation they couldn't refuse." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You've known for 16 years. Give or take?" He took a long drink from his glass. "And once I knew that I knew I'd always win. Because blood matters, especially in a family business." I should have left. Should have stood up and walked away. But I needed to hear this. Needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. "Every time you accomplished something," Ryan continued, clearly enjoying himself now, "I reminded Mom whose eyes you have. Just a little comment here and there. Elena really does look like Aunt Katie, doesn't she? Must be hard for you." And Mom would get that look, that grief look. And suddenly your achievement didn't seem so impressive anymore. My hands were shaking. I gripped the edge of the bar to steady them. Every time they considered promoting you, giving you more responsibility, I'd say something like, "I hope you don't favor the adopted kid just to prove you love them as much as us." Worked every single time. Mom would overcompensate by praising me instead. By giving me opportunities. By protecting me when I fucked up. He leaned closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "You thought it was about competence. You thought if you just worked harder, achieved more, eventually they'd see your value. But it was never about that. I made sure of it." The bar felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. This wasn't just favoritism or blind parental loyalty. This was deliberate, calculated psychological warfare spanning more than a decade. That's why I wasn't worried about your performance reviews or your branch numbers or your strategic plans, Ryan said, settling back on his stool with satisfied confidence. Blood beats competence in a family business. Always has, always will. You were never going to win this, Elena. You were playing a game where the rules guaranteed your failure. He stood up, steadying himself against the bar. You should have just accepted your place. Stayed quiet, stayed grateful for what they gave you. Now you're going to lose everything. He paused and his smile turned cruel. Including the illusion that you were ever really part of this family. He walked away, weaving slightly between tables, leaving me sitting alone with the wreckage of 16 years of manipulation. I ordered a drink. My first alcohol in months because I couldn't afford it, because I'd been surviving on ramen and discipline. The bartender poured me whiskey, and I downed it in one burning swallow. For several minutes I just sat there feeling the alcohol warm my chest, waiting for the devastation to hit. The grief, the rage, the complete collapse of whatever fragile hope I'd still been carrying. Instead, something else came. Clarity. All these years I'd blamed myself. Worked harder, tried to be perfect, bent myself into shapes I thought might finally earn their love. I'd internalized their coldness as proof of my inadequacy, but it had been rigged from the start. Ryan had weaponized my adoption, had spent 16 years systematically poisoning my relationship with my parents, had ensured that every achievement I earned was undermined before it could matter. This wasn't family. This had never been family. This was psychological warfare, and I'd been fighting it blind. But Ryan had just made a crucial mistake. He'd confessed. Given me every detail of his calculated campaign, admitted to over a decade of deliberate sabotage. And he'd done it because he thought I was already defeated, thought I had nothing left to fight with. He was wrong. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Spoke clearly, systematically, documenting everything Ryan had said while the memory was sharp and fresh. Every detail, every admission, every piece of his confession. Then I texted my lawyer. Need to meet ASAP. Have new information. Game changes tomorrow. His response came within minutes. My office, 9 a.m. I finished my drink and stood up. My legs were steady. My hands had stopped shaking. The grief would come later, I knew. The full weight of understanding that my entire childhood had been shaped by one person's calculated cruelty. But right now I felt something different. Purpose. So this was your weapon all along, Ryan. A secret you'd wielded like a knife for over a decade, cutting me down every time I tried to rise. You'd used my own biology against me, turned my grief-stricken mother's pain into a tool to keep me in my place. But you just made a fatal mistake. You told me everything. The meeting with my lawyer on April 6th lasted 3 hours. I laid out everything Ryan had told me at the hotel bar, showed him my documented voice memo, explained the 16 years of systematic sabotage. He listened carefully, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. This changes things significantly, he said when I finished. This establishes a pattern of malicious interference with your employment. Combined with the other evidence you've gathered, you have grounds for multiple claims. I'm not interested in suing them, I said. Not yet, anyway. I want to know what else is coming. I want to see how far this goes before I make my move. He nodded slowly. Sometimes the best strategy is patience. Let them finish destroying themselves. On April 8th, news broke through the company grapevine. Ryan had signed a major contract with Premier Solutions LLC, a vendor supposedly providing technology infrastructure upgrades. $5 million over 2 years. He'd announced it triumphantly in a company-wide email, presenting it as proof that he could land significant deals just as well as I could. By April 10th, the problems were already emerging. Marcus, who'd recently joined a competitor but still had friends at Mitchell & Associates, called me with information he thought I should know. Premier Solutions is a ghost company, he said. Barely operational, no track record. The references Ryan listed, I called one of them. They've never heard of Premier Solutions. The whole thing smells like fraud. I did my own research that night. Premier Solutions had a website that looked professional at first glance, but digging deeper revealed it was only 3 months old. Their claimed projects couldn't be verified. Their leadership team had headshots that reverse image searches revealed were stock photos. Senior management must have discovered the same things because by April 12th there was an emergency investigation. Linda called me, her voice tight with stress. "Elena, this Premier Solutions deal could bankrupt us. Your brother did zero due diligence, ignored every red flag, rushed to sign because he wanted something big to announce before the Q1 board meeting." She paused. "There's also a $500,000 finder's fee that went to some consultant who connected Ryan with Premier. The whole thing looks like a kickback arrangement." "Do my parents know?" "They know. They're in damage control mode. Your mother is still defending him, saying he was taken advantage of. Your father is less convinced, but he's not willing to admit this publicly yet." On April 15th, 2 more disasters struck simultaneously. Johnson Industries sent a formal termination letter ending a relationship that had lasted 12 years and generated $400,000 in annual revenue. The letter was blunt. "We are switching to a competitor immediately due to consistent failure to meet deadlines and unprofessional behavior from new management under Ryan Mitchell. This decision is final." That same afternoon, Patterson Group filed a lawsuit against Mitchell and Associates for $1.2 million, breach of contract. The complaint alleged that Ryan's branch had failed to deliver promised services for which Patterson had already paid substantial deposits. The filing included email evidence showing Ryan promising deliverables while knowing his team couldn't execute, then blaming team members when everything fell apart. The company's liability insurance would cover some of the damages, but not all. And the reputational harm was incalculable. My parents called an emergency meeting that evening. I wasn't invited, but Jamie sent me a text later. "Your father was shouting. Ryan was crying. Your mother kept defending him while Linda presented the financial summary. It's bad, Elena. Really bad." Through my network of people who'd remained loyal, despite everything I received copies of documents I shouldn't have had access to. The Premier Solutions contract with all its red flags highlighted, the payment records showing the suspicious finder's fee, the Patterson lawsuit filing with its damning email exhibits, the Johnson termination letter with its scathing assessment of Ryan's management. Combined with the embezzlement evidence I'd locked away in March, the $90,000 in fraudulent expenses, I now had documentation proving fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and gross negligence. Any single piece would be grounds for immediate termination and possible criminal charges. Together they painted a picture of systematic corruption and incompetence that couldn't be defended. I met with my lawyer on April 18th, spreading the evidence across his conference table like a prosecutor building a case. "I could turn this over to the board right now," I said. "They'd have to fire Ryan immediately, probably face criminal investigation, but the Q1 board meeting is April 30th. I want to present everything then publicly, so there's no way my parents can bury it or spin it later." He studied the documents, occasionally making notes. "It's risky. Waiting gives them more time to potentially discover what you know and prepare countermeasures. But strategically, a public presentation at a board meeting creates accountability. They can't hide from this in front of the full board and external advisors. That's what I want. I want the whole truth exposed at once in front of everyone who matters." "Then we wait," he agreed. "But we prepare thoroughly. I'll help you organize this into a presentation that's unassailable." I was gathering my materials to leave when my phone rang. The private investigator I'd hired in March, Miss Mitchell. "I've completed my background investigation on Ryan Mitchell. There's something you need to hear. Can we meet tomorrow?" Her tone suggested this wasn't routine information. "What did you find?" "Not over the phone. But it's significant. It changes the context of everything else you've told me about." We scheduled a meeting for the next morning at a coffee shop far from any business district where we might be recognized. That night, I sat in my studio apartment surrounded by evidence of my family's corruption and cruelty. One phone call to the board and it would all be over. Ryan would be fired, possibly arrested. The company would face immediate crisis. My parents would have to answer for their protection of him. But I wanted them to suffer longer. I wanted the full weight of consequences to build until it was crushing. I wanted every board member, every employee, every client to see exactly what had been happening while my parents had been protecting their golden child and destroying their adopted daughter. The Q1 meeting was 12 days away. I could wait 12 more days. I'd been patient for 32 years. What was 12 more days when the endgame was finally in sight? The meeting with the private investigator lasted until nearly noon on April 21st. What she'd uncovered about Ryan was damning a pattern of financial irresponsibility dating back to college 2 previous employers who'd quietly let him go rather than prosecute for expense fraud, even a sealed juvenile record she'd managed to obtain through connections I didn't ask about. I left her office with another folder of evidence to add to my growing collection. I'd scheduled a follow-up meeting with my lawyer for 2 that afternoon to discuss presentation strategy for the board meeting. His office was near the courthouse, and I had an hour to kill, so I stopped at a small coffee shop across the street. The kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, quiet enough to think. I was stirring sugar into my coffee when a voice from the corner table made me freeze. Morgan Chen. No one had called me that name in 25 years. I turned slowly. An elderly man sat at a table by the window, late 70s maybe, with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a well-tailored suit that suggested old money and careful habits. He was already standing, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "I'm Richard Thornton," he said as I approached cautiously. "I was your family's attorney for 30 years before I retired last year. I need to speak with you. It's important." I recognized the name. Richard Thornton had handled all of Mitchell & Associates' legal matters for as long as I could remember, but my parents' current lawyers, the ones who'd sent me that cease and desist letter, were from Morrison & Associates. "Why would you want to talk to me?" I asked, still standing. "Please sit. I've been following your situation. I know what they're doing to you." His expression was grave. "And I need you to know something that could change everything." I sat, setting my coffee down carefully. My hands wanted to shake, but I wouldn't let them. Richard folded his hands on the table. 2 years ago, your adoptive father asked me to draft a new will. He wanted to change the inheritance structure to heavily favor Ryan, controlling shares of the company, the house, most of the liquid assets. He wanted to leave you with minimal inheritance, essentially cutting you out of everything you'd helped build. The words settled over me like cold water. I'd known they didn't love me, but this was different. This was systematic erasure, legally documented. "Your mother insisted on it," Richard continued. "She was actually more adamant than your father. She said Ryan was their real son and deserved to inherit what they'd built together. You'd understand, she told me, because you were practical." "Did he sign it?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "No." Richard leaned forward. "I advised him this could be contested, especially given your documented contributions to the company. We went back and forth for months. He was going to sign it in March of last year, had an appointment scheduled. But then he had that health scare. You remember, he was hospitalized for a week with heart palpitations." I nodded. I'd been the one to drive him to the emergency room, had sat in the waiting area for 6 hours while they ran tests. "He never signed it after that. Told me he wanted to think about it more. The original will is still active, the one written 15 years ago that splits everything 50-50 between you and Ryan. Equal shares of the company, equal inheritance rights. I never filed the new will because it was never executed. Legally, you're still an equal heir to everything." I stared at him, trying to process this. "Why are you telling me this? If my parents find out you talk to me, they'll—" "I'm retired," Richard said gently. "They can't hurt me professionally. And besides, I made a promise a long time ago to someone who mattered very much to me." Something in his tone made my breath catch. "Your biological father, Robert Chen, was my law school roommate. My best friend for over 50 years. Richard's eyes grew distant with memory. "When Catherine died in childbirth and Diane agreed to adopt you, Robert was devastated. He felt enormous guilt. He and Catherine weren't married. Both families disapproved of their relationship. She was white, he was Asian American, and this was 1998 in a much less progressive time. When she died, bringing you into the world, Robert wanted to be part of your life. He offered to co-parent, to be involved in any way Diane would allow. She refused, I said quietly, already knowing the answer. She refused, said it would be too confusing for you, that you needed stability and a traditional family structure. Robert respected that decision, but he didn't abandon you. He financially supported the adoption, set up trust funds for your education, contributed to household expenses. But Diane made it clear, money was acceptable. Presence was not. Richard pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, held it without offering it yet. Robert asked me to watch over you legally, to make sure you were protected, that Diane and James treated you fairly in legal matters. I've been monitoring from a distance for 25 years, reviewing contracts when you were made branch manager, advising your father when he considered changing his will. I couldn't interfere directly, but I could make sure the legal structures protected you. My throat was tight. Does Robert know what's been happening? He knows everything. He's been following your career, reading about your achievements. He's incredibly proud of you, Morgan. Richard's voice broke slightly. But there's something else you need to know. Robert is very ill. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. He's in hospice now. The doctors say it's a matter of weeks, maybe less. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. He's been wanting to meet you for years, but he promised Diane he wouldn't interfere in your life. He kept that promise even when it broke his heart. But now at the end he's asking if you'd be willing to see him, just once. He has things he wants to tell you. Things you deserve to know. Richard slid the envelope across the table. My name was written on it in unfamiliar handwriting, slightly shaky. This letter explains everything. His story with Catherine, why he stayed away, what he's felt all these years. And it includes his address at the hospice facility. Richard stood slowly, his own age showing in the careful movement. I can't tell you what to do, Morgan. But I can tell you that Robert Chen is a good man who spent 25 years loving a daughter he was never allowed to know. And he's running out of time. I picked up the envelope with trembling hands. Through the paper, I could feel several pages thick and carefully folded. Why now? I asked. Why tell me all this now? Richard's smile was sad. Because you're about to go to war with your adoptive family. And I wanted you to know that you're not alone. You never were. Your real father has been watching over you all along. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. The board meeting is April 30th. Whatever you're planning, make it count. You have more support than you realize. Then he was gone, leaving me sitting alone with an envelope that contained 25 years of secrets and a father I'd never known existed. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for a long time, staring at the envelope. My meeting with my lawyer was in 20 minutes, but I couldn't move. Couldn't think about board presentations or strategic planning while this letter sat in my hands, heavy with 25 years of secrets. I opened it carefully, pulling out several pages written in shaky handwriting. The date at the top, March 2024, last month. Dear Morgan. It began and my vision blurred immediately. If you're reading this, Richard has done what I asked, told you the truth. I don't have long now. The cancer has spread to my liver and bones. The doctors say weeks, maybe days. But I need you to know your story before I go. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. Your mother, Catherine Morrison, was the love of my life. We met at Boston University in 1992. She was studying English literature. I was in business school. She had this laugh that made everyone around her smile. She saw beauty in everything. Poetry and spreadsheets, if you can believe it. She used to joke that I was too serious, that I needed someone to remind me the world wasn't just numbers and contracts. Her family didn't approve of our relationship. I was Chinese American. They were old money New England WASP, and prejudice was still very strong in the early 90s. They made it clear I wasn't suitable for their daughter. Ironically, her sister Diane was dating my classmate John Chen, your adoptive father now. Diane and John's relationship was acceptable because John was wealthy, established, connected to the right circles. Mine with Catherine wasn't because I was still building my career, still finding my way. We kept our relationship secret for 2 years. Met in coffee shops far from campus, spent weekends in places where no one would recognize us. It was hard, but Catherine said love was worth the difficulty. She was braver than I was. When Catherine got pregnant with you in 1997, both families were furious. Her parents threatened to cut her off completely. My parents were disappointed, worried about scandal. But Catherine and I wanted to keep you. We were planning to get married that summer to build a life together, regardless of what anyone else thought. She was so excited to be a mother. She'd already picked out names, started reading parenting books, made lists of lullabies she wanted to sing to you. Then everything went wrong. My hands were shaking so badly I had to set the letter on the steering wheel to continue reading. The labor started normally, 18 hours, which the doctor said was typical for a first pregnancy. But then there was hemorrhaging. Something went wrong with the placenta. The medical team tried everything, but Catherine was bleeding too fast. She died an hour after delivering you on April 6, 1998. She never got to hold you, never heard you cry. She was 22 years old. I was 25 and completely destroyed. I wanted to raise you alone to honor Catherine's memory by being the father she would have wanted. But Catherine's parents, your maternal grandparents, blamed me for her death. Said if I hadn't gotten their daughter pregnant, she'd still be alive. They threatened legal action if I tried to claim custody. Said they'd drag me through courts for years, make sure I never saw you ruin me financially and professionally. I was drowning in grief and guilt, barely functional. And then Diane made an offer. She'd just married John Chen and felt tremendous guilt about Catherine's death. She told me later that she'd been jealous of our relationship, that she'd always wanted what Catherine had. Not just me, but Catherine's ease with life, her beauty, her joy. When Catherine died, Diane saw it as a chance at penance. She offered to adopt you, to raise you as her own. Your grandparents agreed immediately. They stipulated I have no contact whatsoever. They blamed me for Catherine's death and didn't want me anywhere near you. And I made a terrible choice, Morgan. The worst choice of my life. I agreed. I signed away my parental rights because I thought you'd have a better life with an established family than with a grieving 25-year-old who could barely get out of bed in the morning. But I set up trust funds for your education. Made sure Diane had financial resources to give you everything you'd need. Asked Richard to protect you legally, to watch over you from a distance. It was the only way I knew how to be a father when I wasn't allowed to be one. I've followed your career from afar. Read every article about Mitchell & Associates' achievements. Saw your photo in business journals when you landed major accounts. You have Catherine's intelligence, her kindness, her ability to see potential in people. I'm so proud of you. And I'm so sorry I wasn't there. Sorry I chose what seemed easier over what was right. Sorry I let fear and grief make my decisions instead of love. The letter continued, but I had to stop reading, pressing my palms against my eyes to keep from sobbing in the parking lot. Everything made horrible, perfect sense now. Diane hadn't just adopted her sister's child. She'd adopted the baby of the man she'd wanted for herself, the man who'd chosen her younger, prettier sister instead. Every time Diane looked at me, she saw Catherine, the sister who'd been everything Diane wasn't. Beautiful, spontaneous, beloved. And she saw Robert, the man who'd loved Catherine with an intensity Diane had never experienced in her own marriage. I was a daily reminder of her deepest losses and jealousies. Every time I accomplished something, it echoed Catherine's brilliance. Every time I showed kindness or creativity, it was Catherine's spirit alive again. Diane couldn't separate me, the person, from me, the symbol of everything she'd lost and everything she'd never had. And Ryan represented her real family, her fresh start, the child who wasn't tainted by grief or comparison or complicated history. The child she could love without pain. It had never been about me not being good enough. I could have been perfect, could have achieved everything, and it still wouldn't have mattered. Because the problem wasn't my inadequacy. The problem was that I existed as a reminder of wounds that had never healed. I felt relief wash over me. I wasn't inherently unlovable. Grief, I'd never had a chance. Anger, she'd taken her pain out on an innocent child for 25 years. And finally, understanding. Hurt people hurt people. Diane had been trapped in her own suffering, unable to see past her jealousy and grief to love the child in front of her. I picked up the letter again and read the final paragraph. I'm at Willowbrook Hospice Room 302. If you want to meet me before I go, please come. I understand if you can't, I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'd like to know you even briefly before the end. Your father, Robert. I finally understood why Diane looked at me with such pain. I was the child of the man she'd never stopped wanting, and the sister who died because she'd carried that man's baby. But understanding doesn't mean I forgive what they've done. I drove to Willowbrook Hospice on April 26th with my hands gripping the steering wheel too tightly and my thoughts spinning in circles. Part of me was terrified. Part of me was angry this man had given me up, had let me live with people who resented my existence. But underneath the fear and anger was something else, a desperate curiosity, and a need for answers I'd been denied my entire life. The hospice was a low brick building with carefully tended gardens and large windows that let in natural light. Room 302 was at the end of a quiet hallway, the door half open. I stood outside for a full minute, heart pounding, before I knocked softly. "Come in," a weak voice called. Robert Chen lay in a hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment. Oxygen tubes, IV stands, monitors beeping softly. He was thin, almost skeletal, his skin pale against the white pillows. But when I stepped into the room and he saw me, his eyes lit up with an intensity that made him seem suddenly more alive. "You came," he said, his voice breaking. "I hoped you would, but I didn't expect." "Thank you." I sat in the chair beside his bed, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield. The silence stretched between us, awkward and heavy with 25 years of absence. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning in my chest since I'd read his letter. "Why did you give me up?" His eyes filled with tears that spilled down his hollow cheeks. "Cowardice, grief, and the terrible belief that I was doing what was best for you. I was wrong, Morgan. I've regretted it every single day for 25 years. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about Catherine, how she'd been brilliant in ways that went beyond academics, how she'd had this gift for making people feel seen and valued, how she'd been passionate about social justice and literature and bad science fiction movies. He described their relationship with a tenderness that made my chest ache, the kind of love I'd never witnessed between Diane and John. He pulled out a photo album from his bedside table, hands shaking as he opened it. Catherine at graduation in her cap and gown, laughing with her arms thrown wide. Catherine on a boat, wind in her hair, eyes bright with joy. Catherine reading in a park, completely absorbed in a book. I stared at the photos and saw my own face reflected back at me. The same eyes, the same shape of the smile, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. "She wanted you so much," Robert said softly. "The doctor said her pregnancy was high risk, that she should consider termination. She refused. She told me, 'This baby is our love made real. This baby is the best thing we'll ever create together.' You were wanted, Morgan. So deeply wanted." I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob building in my throat. My adoptive parents had never made me feel wanted. Not once. Not ever. "I've followed your career quietly," Robert continued. "Subscribed to business journals that covered your company. Read every quarterly report I could find. You built that branch from nothing, I know, because I track commercial real estate development across the region. You're brilliant, hardworking, and according to the few articles I found that interviewed your employees, you're kind and fair. Catherine would be so proud of you." The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable. My adoptive parents never said that. Not once in 32 years. Robert's face crumpled with grief. "I know. Richard has kept me informed over the years. Not details, but enough to know you weren't getting the love you deserved. I wanted to intervene so many times. Wanted to show up and demand they treat you better. But legally, I had no right. Diane made absolutely sure of that in the adoption agreement. I'm so sorry I left you in that situation. I thought she'd love you the way she loved her sister. I didn't realize how deep her resentment went until it was too late. We discussed my current situation. Robert knew about the Christmas exile, knew about Ryan's failures, and my parents' protection of him. His network was better than I'd realized. "What will you do?" he asked. "I have evidence that could destroy Ryan's career. Embezzlement, fraud, gross negligence. I'm presenting everything at the board meeting in 4 days. But part of me..." I stopped, embarrassed by the admission. "Part of me still hopes my parents will see reason, that we can fix things somehow." Robert took my hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his frailty. "Sometimes the family we're born into isn't the family we keep. You've already proven you're strong enough to build your own life. Don't let their dysfunction define you. You're Catherine's daughter. You're my daughter. And you deserve people who see your worth." As I prepared to leave, gathering my purse and jacket, Robert spoke again. "I need to tell you something. I've updated my will recently. You're my sole heir, the business, the investments, the properties, everything. It's substantial. My lawyer will contact you after I'm gone. Use it to build the life Catherine and I dreamed for you." I froze. "Robert, I didn't come here for money." "I know. That's exactly why you deserve it." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But there's a condition attached to the inheritance." My stomach tightened. "What condition?" "You must make a good faith effort to reconcile with Diane and John, attend family mediation, give them a genuine chance to apologize and change their behavior. If you refuse to try, 50% of the inheritance goes to charity." I stared at him, betrayed. Why after everything they've done to me? His smile was sad and knowing. Because Catherine believed in forgiveness and second chances. She believed people could change if given the right opportunity. And because I don't want you to spend your life consumed by anger the way Diane has been. I want you to be free, Morgan. Whether that freedom is with them or without them is your choice, but you have to give them the chance first. Promise me you'll try." My throat was so tight I could barely speak. "I promise." Robert closed his eyes, exhausted from our conversation. "Good. Now go win that board meeting. Show them who Catherine's child really is." I left the hospice with tears streaming down my face and a clarity I'd never had before. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it. But I'd just spent 2 hours with a dying man who loved me simply because I existed, who was proud of me, not despite who I was, but because of it. In 4 days, I would face my adoptive family at that board meeting. And this time, I wasn't going in alone or desperate for their approval. I had evidence. I had allies. I had the truth. And I had an army behind me. I walked into the boardroom on April 30th at 8:45, 15 minutes early. The room was exactly as I remembered: long mahogany table leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I'd sat in this room dozens of times over the years, presenting quarterly results, proposing expansion strategies, defending budget allocations. Today was different. I set up my laptop at the far end of the table, connecting it to the projection system. My hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I'd rehearsed this presentation a dozen times with my lawyer, refined every slide, verified every piece of evidence. The board members arrived in clusters. My father came first with my mother, both dressed formally, their expressions carefully neutral. Ryan followed minutes later, confident and relaxed, clearly expecting this to be another routine meeting where problems were discussed in abstract terms and then dismissed. The external board members arrived next: Patricia Walsh, the investor representative; Thomas Kim, retired CEO of a competitor firm; Sarah Rodriguez, commercial real estate expert; and 2 others whose names I knew but had rarely interacted with. Controller Linda and CFO Marcus entered last, taking seats near the middle of the table. The meeting began at 9 o'clock sharp. My father called it to order and launched into the Q1 financial review. He presented consolidated numbers, showing the company was down 15% overall concerning he acknowledged, but framed as a temporary adjustment period related to market conditions and leadership transitions. Ryan's branches were buried in the consolidated, reporting their catastrophic losses obscured by combining them with profitable divisions. My branch's strong performance was mentioned briefly, almost dismissively, as if it were luck rather than strategy. The presentation moved toward Q2 planning. My father was advancing to the next slide when I spoke. I have concerns about the Q1 reporting that need to be addressed before we proceed. My father's jaw tightened. Elena, this isn't the appropriate time. We can discuss departmental issues in a separate... Patricia Walsh interrupted. Actually, John, I'd like to hear this. Elena's branch is the only consistently profitable division. I think we should listen to what she has to say. I stood and walked to the front of the room, connecting my laptop to the projector. This will take approximately 15 minutes. I believe it's time well spent. The title slide appeared on the screen, Q1 Financial Analysis, the full picture. I began methodically letting the data speak. First slide, branch-by-branch comparison showing my branch's 42% growth versus Ryan's 35% loss. Second slide, client retention rates, mine at 98%, Ryan's at 55%. Third slide, employee turnover, mine at 12%, Ryan's at 67%. The board members were leaning forward now, taking notes. Then I moved to the bombshells. The Premier Solutions contract signed in April. I displayed the contract analysis. This vendor has no verifiable track record, falsified references, and appears to be a shell company. The $500,000 finder's fee was paid to a consultant who is Ryan's college roommate, suggesting a kickback arrangement. Ryan shifted in his seat. That's a complete mischaracterization. I have bank records, I said calmly, advancing to the next slide showing the payment trail. Next came the Patterson lawsuit documents showing emails where Ryan had promised deliverables while his own team members warned him repeatedly that the timeline was impossible. I displayed the hostile work environment complaints, the expense reports showing $90,000 in personal charges, restaurants with no corresponding client meetings, business trips to vacation destinations with no business purpose, invoices from vendors that didn't exist. This isn't just poor performance, I concluded, my voice steady. This is fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The company faces an existential threat because of one person's actions, and leadership has been protecting that person instead of protecting the company. Silence filled the boardroom for 30 seconds. The only sound was the hum of the projector. Patricia Walsh spoke first. I'm speechless. Is all of this evidence verified? Linda, the controller, sat up straighter. I can confirm all financial documents are accurate. I've been trying to bring these concerns to leadership for months but was told not to make trouble. Marcus, the CFO, nodded. Same. We were explicitly instructed to stop asking questions about certain expenditures. The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other, demanding explanations, asking for clarification. Ryan jumped to his feet. This is slander. Elena has been trying to sabotage me for months. She's lying, twisting everything to make me look bad because she's always been jealous. I held up a USB drive. Everything I presented is documented and verified. I have copies for everyone here. I walked around the table, placing a drive in front of each board member. Review it at your leisure. Every claim is backed by primary source documents. My mother stood, her face flushed. This is a family matter that should be handled privately, not aired in front of... Patricia cut her off sharply. This is a corporate governance matter, Diane. If even half of what Elena presented is accurate, we're looking at potential criminal charges. We need an independent investigation immediately, and we need to suspend Ryan from all operational responsibilities pending that investigation. My father tried to regain control. Now, let's not be hasty. We should take time to review. I'm calling for an emergency vote, Patricia said. All in favor of suspending Ryan Mitchell from operational duties, pending an independent investigation into these allegations. Hands went up around the table. Patricia, Thomas, Sarah, and the other 2 external board members. Linda raised her hand. Marcus raised his. Those opposed, only my parents' hands went up. The motion passes 6-2. Ryan, you're suspended effective immediately. You'll need to surrender your company access credentials and keys before you leave today. Ryan's face went purple with rage. He swept his papers off the table, sending them flying across the room. You'll regret this, all of you. You're making a huge mistake, and when this blows up in your faces, don't come crawling back to me. He stormed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. His eyes locked on mine, and the look he gave me was pure hatred, a promise of retribution. Then he was gone, the door slamming behind him so hard the windows rattled. The meeting dissolved into chaos, board members demanding follow-up meetings, my parents trying unsuccessfully to minimize the situation, legal counsel frantically taking notes about liability exposure. I sat back down at my seat, my hands finally starting to shake now that the adrenaline was fading. I'd done it. I'd presented the truth, and they'd believed me. Patricia approached as the room was clearing. That took courage, she said quietly. Stay in touch. We're going to need your cooperation as this investigation moves forward. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The vote was 6-2. Ryan was suspended, but as he'd stormed out, that final look had promised this wasn't over. I arrived at the family home on May 2nd with my lawyer beside me. I'd told him I wouldn't enter alone anymore, wouldn't face them without a witness to whatever might be said. The house looked the same, as it always had, pristine landscaping, the same wreath still hanging on the door from some holiday I could no longer remember. But it felt different now, like enemy territory. My parents sat together on the living room couch, a united front. This was the same room where we'd celebrated Christmases, where I'd opened presents as a child, and believed I was part of a family. Ryan wasn't present. Still suspended, probably too angry to face me yet. My father spoke first, his voice tight with controlled anger. What you did at that board meeting was unconscionable. Airing family business, publicly humiliating your brother in front of the entire board. Family business, I interrupted. It's corporate fraud. I presented documented facts about embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. That's not family business. That's criminal behavior. My mother's voice was cold as ice. You've destroyed this family. Are you happy now? Your jealousy has finally won. The word hit me like a physical blow, reopening wounds I'd thought had scarred over. But I kept my voice steady. Jealousy, I built the most successful branch in company history while Ryan committed crimes and lost millions. Where exactly is the jealousy in that? You've always resented Ryan, my mother continued. From the moment he was born, you've competed with him, tried to make him look bad. Something inside me snapped. I stood up, done with pretense, done with letting their narrative replace reality. I need to know something. My voice came out stronger than I felt. I've spent 25 years trying to earn your love, working harder, being perfect, making you proud. And it was never enough. Nothing I did was ever enough. Why? What did I do to make you hate me? My mother froze. My father looked away, suddenly fascinated by the carpet. I found the adoption papers. I continued, feeling my voice crack despite my effort to stay composed. I know I'm Catherine's child. I know about Robert Chen. I understand it was complicated and painful, but I was just a baby. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask to be adopted. Why did you punish me for existing? The silence in the room was suffocating. My mother's face hardened into something I'd never seen before, not anger exactly, but something rawer and more desperate. You want to know? Her voice shook. Fine. My father reached for her hand. Diane, don't. She pulled away from him sharply, stood up, and faced me directly. You want to know why I could never love you? The words came out like she'd been holding them back for decades, and now the dam had broken. Because every time I look at you, I see him. Robert Chen, the man I loved first before Catherine stole him from me. My lawyer shifted slightly beside me, and I heard the quiet click of his phone beginning to record. I met Robert in college. My mother continued, tears starting to stream down her face. I thought we had something real. We studied together, spent time together, and I thought he felt the same way I did. Then he met my baby sister, beautiful, brilliant Catherine, and suddenly I didn't exist anymore. I became invisible. I married John because Robert chose her over me, and I had to watch them be happy while I settled for second best. My father flinched but said nothing. Then Catherine got pregnant with you and died bringing you into the world, and suddenly I'm supposed to raise you, the child of the man I loved, and the sister he chose over me. Her voice rose, years of suppressed emotion finally spilling out. Do you know what that's like? To look at a child every single day and see the face of your deepest failure? I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. You have his intelligence, his determination, his way of seeing problems and solving them. Catherine's eyes and smile. Every achievement you made reminded me of what they had together, what I never had with anyone. And I hated it. She was sobbing now, the words coming between gasps. I hated that you were proof he loved her, not me. Proof that I was second choice, always second choice. The room felt like it was tilting. My lawyer's hand touched my elbow, briefly steadying. Ryan is my real child. My mother continued, her voice breaking. Mine and John's. No ghosts, no comparisons, no reminders of everything I lost. I could love them without seeing my failures reflected back at me every single day. So yes, I favored them. I protected them. I couldn't help it. You were always Catherine's child, Robert's child. Never mine. I found my voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. I was 8 years old when I first felt you didn't love me. 8 years old. And every day after that, for 24 years, I tried so hard to be good enough to make you see me, to earn what you gave Ryan without him even asking. My mother sank back onto the couch, her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. I know, and I'm sorry, but I couldn't. I just couldn't. My father sat frozen beside her, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. Elena, I don't. I held up my hand. There's nothing you can say that will make this better. The room fell silent, except for my mother's crying. The truth was finally spoken. The ghost that had haunted our family for 25 years, the poison that had seeped into every interaction, every holiday, every moment I'd spent wondering why I wasn't enough. And there was no coming back from it. I left my parents' house on May 2nd without saying goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The truth had been spoken, and it had shattered whatever fragile illusion of family we'd been maintaining. The independent forensic audit concluded on May 6th. Given the severity of the allegations and the company's precarious financial position, the auditors had worked around the clock. Their report was delivered to the board on May 8th, and Patricia Walsh called me personally that afternoon. Every single allegation you presented has been confirmed, she said. The total embezzlement comes to $127,000 over 18 months. The Premier Solutions contract is definitely fraudulent. The company is a shell corporation with no legitimate business operations. The kickback payment to Ryan's college roommate is documented and illegal. The Patterson lawsuit looks bad for us. Our lawyers recommend an $800,000 settlement to avoid a worse judgment at trial. And HR has 3 employees prepared to testify about hostile work environment, including one who's willing to go on record about a sexual harassment comment. I sat in my studio apartment, listening to her enumerate each confirmed failure, each proven lie. The board is meeting tomorrow morning for an emergency vote, Patricia continued. I'm fairly certain I know how it will go, but I wanted to give you advance notice. Your parents will recuse themselves from the vote given the obvious conflict of interest. The vote on May 9th was unanimous among the eligible board members. Immediate termination, no severance. Ryan was banned from company property and required to cooperate fully with authorities or face additional legal action. The company would be referring the matter to law enforcement for criminal investigation. Word spread through the commercial real estate community with stunning speed. It was a small industry where everyone knew everyone, where reputations were built over decades and could be destroyed in days. By that afternoon, Ryan's LinkedIn profile had been updated to show former vice president at Mitchell & Associates. By the next morning, a business journal had run an article with the headline, "Local Company Executive Terminated Amid Fraud Investigation." I watched from a distance as Ryan's carefully constructed professional life collapsed. Former colleagues who'd praised him at networking events now didn't return his calls. Business partners he'd tried to contact for support responded with variations of, "My lawyer advises me to avoid any connection to your situation." Friends who'd benefited from his expense account generosity suddenly had no time for lunch. The golden child who'd been celebrated and protected and favored his entire life was suddenly completely alone. Jamie from HR called me on May 10th with information I hadn't asked for, but probably needed to know. "Ryan showed up at your parents' house this afternoon. Half the neighborhood heard him screaming. I live 2 streets over, my friend texted me about it." I could picture it perfectly. Ryan pulling up in the BMW the company had paid for the one that was probably already scheduled for repossession. Banging on the door, demanding they fix everything the way they'd always fixed everything before. According to Jamie's friend, who'd heard the whole thing from her yard, Diane had tried to console him. "We're talking to lawyers. Maybe we can find a way to—" But John had interrupted, and his voice had been different, quieter, defeated. "No, we can't. The evidence is overwhelming. If we keep trying to protect you, we could lose everything. The company, the house, our own reputations." Ryan had turned on them then, screaming loud enough for multiple neighbors to hear. "You promised I'd inherit everything. You promised Elena would never matter. You said I was the important one, the real child. Now you're abandoning me." John's response had been quiet but firm. "You lied to us. About the expenses, about the contract, about everything. We can't protect you from criminal charges. We won't destroy ourselves trying." Ryan had stormed out, tires squealing as he'd sped away. Inside the house, Diane had collapsed on the couch, sobbing. "What have we done? How did it come to this?" John had no answer. Their golden child, the one they'd shaped through decades of endless favoritism and excuses, the one they'd protected from every consequence, the one they'd elevated above competence and accountability, had been revealed as exactly what that treatment creates. Entitled dishonest, incapable of taking responsibility, unable to function without someone cleaning up his messes. I felt no satisfaction hearing this. No triumph. Just a hollow sadness for all the years wasted, all the damage done, all the ways a family had destroyed itself through favoritism and lies. Patricia called me again on May 11th. "The district attorney's office has opened an investigation. They'll want to interview you since you brought the initial evidence forward. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," I said. "There's something else. The forensic auditors found irregularities they want to dig into further. Some financial transactions that don't quite make sense. They're requesting access to additional records going back 3 years. This might get bigger before it gets smaller." I thanked her and ended the call, then sat staring at my laptop screen. Ryan had lost his job, his reputation, and his family's unconditional support. Criminal charges were likely coming. His professional life was in ruins. They thought losing his position and reputation was the worst of it. But Ryan had one more secret, and when it came out, everything would get worse. I received the email from John on May 15th. The subject line was blank, and the message was brief. "Can we meet just us? I need to talk to you without Diane or lawyers. Please, Dad." It was the first time he'd signed anything Dad in years. Usually it was John or Father in formal company emails, or nothing at all. I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. What was the point? What could he possibly say that would change anything? But curiosity won out over caution, and I agreed to meet him at Riverside Park at 3 in the afternoon. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. His face was drawn, his clothes hung looser on his frame like he'd lost 20 pounds, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders I'd never seen before. I sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving space between us. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." I didn't respond, just waited. He stared at the ground for a long moment, then began speaking without looking at me. "I need to say things I should have said 25 years ago. Things I was too cowardly to say when they might have mattered." The breeze off the water was cool. A jogger passed by. Life continued around us while we sat in our small pocket of devastation. "I always knew you were the better one," John said. "More capable, more honest, harder working. When you were 12 and won that regional math competition, I was so proud I wanted to frame the certificate and hang it in my office. When you graduated top of your class, I wanted to stand up at that ceremony and tell everyone you were my daughter. When you built that branch into the company's star performer, I knew you were the future of the business." I felt confusion rising through the numbness. "Then why did you let her—" He held up his hand. "Because I was afraid of losing Diane." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed. "You need to understand something. Diane never loved me. Not really. I was the consolation prize when Robert chose Catherine. Our entire marriage I've known I was second choice. The safe option. The practical choice." His voice cracked slightly. "I stayed because I loved her, even knowing she didn't feel the same way about me. And I was terrified that if I chose you over Ryan, if I defended you or gave you the credit you deserved, or loved you the way you deserved to be loved, she'd leave me. That I'd lose what little I had." He pressed his palms against his knees. "So I sacrificed your childhood, your happiness, your relationship with us. I stood by and watched her favor Ryan for all the wrong reasons, and I said nothing. I did nothing, because I was too weak to risk my marriage. And now," I asked quietly, "now I've lost everything anyway." His laugh was bitter. "The company's in crisis. Ryan might go to prison. Diane can barely look at me because I finally stopped enabling our son's destruction. And you rightfully hate me." I didn't contradict him. "There were so many moments," he continued, and now tears were sliding down his face. "When you were 9 and came home crying because Ryan had broken your science project, and Diane said it was an accident, I knew it wasn't. I'd seen him do it. When you were 16 and earned that competitive internship, but we made you give your spot to Ryan instead because he needed the opportunity more, I knew it was wrong. When you built that branch from nothing and we gave Ryan credit at the company dinner, I saw your face and I hated myself." His hands were shaking. "Every single time I chose cowardice over doing right by you. Every single time I told myself it was to keep the peace to protect the family. But really, I was just protecting myself. Protecting my marriage to a woman who never truly loved me." "Did you ever even want to adopt me?" I asked. "Or was that just Diane's guilt?" John met my eyes fully for the first time. "Honestly, I did want to. Catherine was like a sister to me in college. We were close friends. When she died, when I saw you in that hospital, this tiny helpless baby who'd lost her mother, taking you in felt right. I thought I could give you the father Robert couldn't be. I thought I could do right by Catherine's memory." He wiped his face roughly. "But then I let Diane's pain take over everything. I let her resentment poison our home. And I disappeared when you needed me most because I was too afraid to stand up for you." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But you need to know this, you were always enough. More than enough. You were extraordinary. And I failed you, not because of who you were, but because of who I wasn't. We sat in silence for several minutes. A family walked by with a small child between them, the kid laughing and jumping over cracks in the sidewalk. The kind of simple, uncomplicated family moment I'd never really had. "I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it," John said finally. "But I'm so sorry." I looked at him, this man who'd raised me, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework, who'd been present in body but absent in the ways that mattered most. I saw him clearly for the first time, not as a villain, but as something more complicated. A man who'd loved a woman who didn't love him back, who'd been too weak to fight for what was right, who'd sacrificed his adopted daughter's happiness to preserve a marriage that was already broken. For the first time, I saw him as a victim too. Trapped in a loveless marriage, too weak to fight for what was right, too afraid of loneliness to demand better. I didn't forgive him. The damage was too deep, the years too long, the wounds too raw. But I finally understood. I left the park bench on May 15th feeling hollowed out and heavy at the same time. John's confession had added layers of complexity to a situation I'd tried to see in simple terms, villains and victims right and wrong. Reality, as always, was messier. On May 20th, I was working in my office when my assistant buzzed through. "There's someone named Sarah Mitchell here to see you. Says it's urgent. She doesn't have an appointment, but she seems really determined." The name hit me like cold water. Sarah Mitchell. I knew that name, and the memories attached to it weren't pleasant. "Send her in," I said, already tensing. The woman who entered was in her early 30s, dressed professionally in a blazer and slacks. She carried a folder and a photograph. Her face clicked into place immediately. Sarah, the employee I'd fired 3 years ago for embezzling $50,000 from the company's petty cash accounts. She'd been escorted out by security. Her career in commercial real estate effectively ended. The industry had blacklisted her. "Sarah," I kept my voice neutral. "This isn't a good time." She held up her hand. "I know you don't want to see me. I know what you think I did. But I need 5 minutes. Please, it's about Ryan, and what he did to both of us." Something in her tone made me pause. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. She sat down, took a steadying breath, and looked me directly in the eye. 3 years ago, you fired me for stealing $50,000. I didn't steal that money. Ryan did. "I saw the bank records," I said. "Your login credentials, your authorization codes. You saw falsified bank records." She opened the folder and pulled out several pages. "Look at these. These are the originals I kept copies of before I was locked out of the system. The transactions match Ryan's expense patterns, not mine. The timing aligns with his trips, his vendor relationships. The evidence against me was planted after I refused to stay quiet about something else." She handed me a photograph. A small boy, maybe 3 years old, with dark hair and Asian features. The resemblance to Ryan was unmistakable, the same eyes, the same shape of the face. "This is Leo," Sarah said quietly. "Ryan's son, mine and his." My mind went blank for a moment, trying to process what she was telling me. "We dated in college," Sarah continued. "It was serious, or at least I thought it was. I got pregnant senior year. Ryan promised to support us, said we'd figure it out together. Then when I was 6 months along, he ghosted me, blocked my calls. When I finally reached him through a mutual friend, he told me I was some crazy ex, and that he wanted nothing to do with me or the baby." She pulled out another document, what looked like a birth certificate. "I had Leo in 2021. Raised him alone while working 2 jobs. I tried to get child support through legal channels. Ryan threatened to destroy my career if I didn't disappear. I thought he was bluffing." "He wasn't," I said quietly. "No. In 2022, Ryan contacted me with what he called an olive branch. Said he'd had time to think that he wanted to help finally. He got me a job at the company, said he'd start contributing to Leo's expenses. I was desperate. Childcare costs were drowning me. I believed him. Sarah's hands tightened on the folder. But it was a trap. After 3 months, once I'd settled in and dropped my guard, I asked him again about formalizing child support. A week later, money went missing and all the evidence pointed to me. Ryan had set it up perfectly. I had access to the accounts. I had motive. I'd mentioned to HR that I was struggling with daycare costs. There was even a fake email from my account requesting the transfer. I thought back to that investigation. Ryan had been the one to bring the discrepancies to my attention. He'd presented the evidence so thoroughly, so convincingly. "You fired me based on Ryan's investigation," Sarah said. "I tried to fight it, but I couldn't afford lawyers. Then Ryan offered me $75,000 to sign an NDA and go away quietly. He said if I didn't take it, he'd make sure I never worked in this industry again. And he'd sue for custody of Leo just to hurt me, even though he'd never wanted anything to do with his son." She pulled out a legal document and slid it across my desk. "I took the money because I had a toddler to feed. But the NDA expired last month. And with Ryan facing criminal investigation, my lawyer thinks we can prove he framed me. The original bank records I kept, the timeline, the pattern of behavior, it all points to him." Sarah leaned forward. "But I need your help. You fired me based on false evidence that Ryan fabricated. You're also his victim. Together we might actually have a chance at justice. And maybe I can finally get the child support he's owed Leo for 3 years." I stared at the documents spread across my desk. Another victim. Another elaborate setup. Another person Ryan had used and discarded when they became inconvenient. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I asked. "Fear, the NDA, and honestly, I didn't think anyone would believe me. Ryan was protected, golden, untouchable. But now things are different. Now people are actually looking at what he's done." Her voice wavered slightly. "I have a son who deserves to know his father was held accountable, and I deserve to have my reputation restored." I looked at the photo of Leo again. 3 years old. The same age I'd been when Diane and John had adopted me, when my fate had been decided by adults, making choices I had no control over. My old enemy was now my strongest ally, and Ryan's web of lies was about to strangle him. "I'll help you," I said. "Let me see everything you have." I met with my lawyer on May 21st to discuss Sarah's story. He'd spent the previous evening reviewing everything she'd provided: bank records, emails, DNA test results, documentation spanning 3 years. "This is solid," he said, spreading the documents across his conference table. "The original bank records show a completely different transaction pattern than what was presented to you when you fired her. The email metadata proves that messages supposedly from her account actually originated from Ryan's IP address. And the DNA test conclusively proves paternity. She had it done when Leo was born and kept all the documentation." He looked up at me. "If she testifies, combined with the current fraud case, Ryan is looking at serious prison time. We're talking multiple felony counts." I stared at the evidence, feeling sick. I fired her, destroyed her reputation based on lies Ryan fed me. Why should she trust me now? "She shouldn't," my lawyer said bluntly. "But she needs you. A wrongful termination suit is much stronger with your cooperation, you admitting you were deceived, testifying about how Ryan presented the false evidence. And you need her too. This proves a pattern of behavior going back years. Makes your case against Ryan even more damning." I was quiet for a long moment. "Set up a meeting. I owe her an apology, regardless of whether she helps us." The meeting was scheduled for May 23rd at my lawyer's office. Sarah arrived precisely on time, her expression guarded. We sat across from each other at the conference table, my lawyer and hers flanking us. I spoke first. "I'm sorry. I should have investigated more thoroughly before firing you. I trusted Ryan's evidence without questioning it, without doing my own due diligence. That was wrong, and it hurt you and your son. I can't undo that damage, but I can help you now." Sarah studied me for a long moment. "I don't forgive you yet, but I appreciate the apology. It was more than I deserved, and I told her so." Over the next week, we coordinated our strategy. Sarah filed a wrongful termination suit against the company and fraud charges against Ryan personally. She filed for child support and back support, $125,000 owed over 3 years. She agreed to provide testimony for the Patterson lawsuit, adding another voice to the chorus of people Ryan had harmed. I agreed to testify that I'd fired Sarah based on false evidence provided by Ryan, that I'd been manipulated into destroying an innocent person's career. Together, we compiled a complete timeline. Ryan's relationship with Sarah from 2019 to 2021, the pregnancy and his abandonment in 2021, the harassment and threats throughout 2021 and 2022, the setup and false firing in 2022, the NDA coercion that same year. The pattern was undeniable. Ryan destroyed anyone who threatened his carefully constructed image, employees who challenged him, women who expected him to take responsibility, family members who outperformed him. Everyone was expendable. On May 30th, Sarah's lawyer filed all claims simultaneously. The strategy was designed for maximum impact, and it worked. By that afternoon, the press had caught wind of the story. "Former executive faces additional fraud charges, paternity suit," read the headline. The article included a photo of Leo Sarah's choice. She was done hiding, done protecting Ryan from the consequences of his actions. The article detailed everything: the embezzlement, the framing of an innocent employee, the abandoned child, the use of family position and company resources to escape accountability. The comments section filled rapidly with people from the industry. I always knew something was off about them. Worked with Ryan Mitchell, once most unprofessional experience of my career. This explains so much. The company's board called an emergency meeting for June 2nd. My phone buzzed with an email notification, and I felt my stomach tighten when I saw the sender, Diane. "We need to talk. This has gone too far, please." I showed the email to my lawyer. He read it and shook his head. "They're going to try one last manipulation. Maybe threats, maybe begging, maybe some combination. You should meet with them, but record everything. Don't go alone." I responded to Diane's email, "I'll meet, but my lawyer will be present and everything is on record. If you want to talk, those are my terms." Her response came within minutes. "Agreed." The fact that she'd agreed so quickly was telling. No pushback, no negotiation, no insistence on privacy. They were desperate. My lawyer and I prepared for the meeting like we were preparing for trial. We reviewed every piece of evidence, every timeline, every potential argument they might make. We discussed what they might offer: money, apologies, promises of change. "They're going to ask you to make this go away," my lawyer predicted. "To drop the charges, convince Sarah to drop hers, tell the board to go easy on Ryan. They'll offer you something in exchange." What could they possibly offer that would make me do that? He looked at me seriously. "That's what we're about to find out." We had enough evidence to destroy Ryan completely. The fraud charges, the embezzlement, the wrongful termination, the abandoned child, the pattern of abuse spanning years. Any one of these things would have been damaging. Together, they were devastating. But I wasn't prepared for what my adoptive mother would offer in exchange for mercy. Ban Dung Roy. Fan 21. Thieu Huang Wat Cham Tu so với mục tiêu 100 Tôi sẽ viết lại về đầy đủ nội dung he. The meeting took place on June 2nd in my lawyer's conference room. The space was sterile and professional neutral territory that felt nothing like the family dining room where we'd once shared meals and celebrated holidays back when I'd still believed we were a real family. My lawyer and I sat on one side of the table. Diane John and their attorney sat on the other. The formality was jarring. We were strangers negotiating terms, not family trying to heal. Diane began without preamble. "We want to resolve this situation before more damage is done to the family and the company." "You mean before Ryan goes to prison?" I asked. John flinched. Diane's jaw tightened, but she pressed forward. "We're prepared to offer you a settlement," she continued, sliding a document across the table. "Full control of the company, significant salary increase, public recognition of your contributions over the years, a formal apology in writing. In exchange, you ask Sarah to drop the charges and you stop pursuing this vendetta against your brother." My lawyer leaned forward before I could respond. "That's not possible. Ms. Mitchell's case is entirely separate from my client's. She has her own attorney, her own grievances, her own right to seek justice, and calling the presentation of evidence of criminal behavior a vendetta fundamentally mischaracterizes the situation." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Their attorney shifted papers unnecessarily. John stared at his hands. I spoke carefully, measuring each word. "For 25 years you taught me that truth matters, that integrity is everything, that family protects each other by holding each other accountable, not by covering up wrongdoing. I'm just applying those lessons. Ryan committed crimes. Sarah and her son deserve justice. I won't interfere with that process even for you." Diane's composure cracked. Her voice rose, shaking with emotion. "You're going to destroy this family over money and hurt feelings, over ancient history that should have stayed buried." "No," I said, keeping my voice steady even as anger flared in my chest. "Ryan destroyed this family by being a criminal you enabled for 35 years. By hurting people and facing no consequences because you always protected him. I'm just refusing to help cover it up anymore." John put his hand on Diane's arm and spoke quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "They're right, Diane. We've been lying to ourselves for years. Ryan is an adult who made terrible choices. We can't protect them from consequences anymore. We shouldn't have been protecting them all along." Diane turned on him, her eyes blazing. "So you're taking their side now? After everything we've been through, after all the years we spent building this family, you're choosing the adopted child over our son." "I'm finally stopping taking sides," John said, and there was a profound sadness in his voice that made him sound 20 years older. "What Ryan did was wrong. What we did to Elena was wrong. We can't fix any of it by offering money to stay quiet. That's just more of the same pattern that got us here." This was clearly an ongoing argument between them, one that had been playing out behind closed doors for weeks. I could see it in the way they moved around each other, the practiced nature of their positions. Diane started crying, then real tears, not the manipulative kind I'd seen her use at family gatherings when she wanted sympathy or wanted to redirect attention. These were tears of genuine despair. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't know how we got here. I don't know what to do." I felt unexpected sympathy rise in my chest, but I stayed firm. "We got here because you chose favoritism over fairness, image over integrity, comfort over truth. For decades, every time Ryan did something wrong, you made excuses. Every time I did something right, you minimized it. These are just the consequences of those choices finally catching up." The meeting ended without resolution. Their lawyer tried to schedule a follow-up, suggesting we reconvene in a week, but mine said firmly that we'd need to wait until after the criminal investigation concluded and Sarah's case was resolved. As they were leaving, Diane stopped at the door and looked back at me. Her face was drawn, aged by stress and grief. "Do you hate us?" I considered the question, honestly taking my time. "No, but I don't trust you, and I don't know if that can ever change." In the week that followed, I noticed small shifts, incremental movements toward something that might eventually resemble accountability. On June 5th, John sent an email to the full board formally recommending me for the CEO position. He and Diane were stepping back from active management given the scandal surrounding Ryan and their compromised judgment. The email was surprisingly professional and generous in its assessment of my qualifications, detailing my branch's performance and my leadership capabilities without the usual caveats or qualifications. On June 7th, John sent me another email, brief and personal. "Your mother has started seeing a therapist. She's trying. It's hard for her, but she's trying. Just wanted you to know." I didn't respond, but I saved the email in a folder I'd created called Evidence of Change. On June 10th, the company released a public statement that had clearly been fought over. We deeply regret that an employee, Sarah Mitchell, was wrongfully terminated in 2022 based on false evidence. We have reached a settlement with Ms. Mitchell and apologize publicly for the damage to her reputation and livelihood. We are committed to ensuring this never happens again. I knew from Patricia that Diane and John had pushed hard for that statement. The board would have preferred something vaguer, more protective of the company's interests, and less specific about fault. But my parents had insisted on naming Sarah, on taking clear responsibility, on making amends publicly. They were trying. I could see that clearly. But I also noticed what they still couldn't do. In private conversations John had with board members, conversations that Patricia Walsh shared with me, because she believed I had a right to know, they still referred to Ryan as going through a hard time, rather than facing consequences for crimes he committed, still minimizing the severity, still unable to fully accept the reality of what their son had done and who he'd become because of decades of their enabling. It was progress, but not transformation. Incremental change, not fundamental shift. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Maybe that was all they were capable of. Maybe decades of denial and favoritism and twisted family dynamics couldn't be undone in weeks, no matter how desperately they wanted to change, or how much pain they were finally willing to feel. Maybe it had to be enough. I was thinking about this on June 11th, sitting in my apartment with Sarah's case files spread across my kitchen table, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Ms. Mitchell. The voice was professional, formal, carefully modulated. This is Richard Thornton, Robert Chen's attorney. I need to speak with you about Mr. Chen's estate. Can we meet tomorrow? My heart seized in my chest. Is he... Mr. Chen passed away yesterday evening, peacefully in his sleep at the hospice. I'm very sorry for your loss. They were trying to change slowly, incompletely, but trying. Then Robert's lawyer called with news that would change everything again. I woke on June 12th to the news that Robert had died. Richard called early in the morning, his voice gentle with the practiced sympathy of someone who'd delivered this kind of news many times before. He passed peacefully last night, Richard said. In his sleep. He wasn't in pain at the end. I sat on my futon in my tiny apartment and cried for a father I'd barely known but who'd watched over me from a distance for 25 years. Who'd loved my mother. Who'd loved me enough to stay away when he thought it was best, even though that choice had haunted him. Per his wishes, I'm convening a will reading on June 15th, Richard continued. Your presence is required. On June 15th, I arrived at Richard's law office. The conference room was formal and somber with dark wood paneling and heavy curtains. Present were Richard, an executor of the estate I didn't recognize, and a representative from Chen Industries, a woman in her 40s who introduced herself as the company's general counsel. Richard opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents. I, Robert James Chen, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The standard legal language washed over me, revocations of prior wills, appointment of executors, various technical provisions. Then Richard reached the substantive provisions. To my daughter Morgan Chen, legally known as Elena Mitchell, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes majority ownership of Chen Industries, my investment portfolio valued at approximately $47 million, real estate holdings valued at $18 million, and all personal effects. Total estate value is approximately $180 million. The number hit me like a physical force. $180 million. I'd been living on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, walking 3 miles to work to save gas money, and now I was inheriting more wealth than I could have imagined. Richard continued reading, and my attention snapped back to his words. However, given my daughter's complicated family situation, and in honor of Catherine Morrison's deeply held values regarding forgiveness and family, I established the following trust structure. My stomach tightened. 50% of the estate, approximately $90 million, transfers immediately and unconditionally to Morgan. This is yours with no strings attached, no conditions, no requirements. Use it as you see fit. $90 million. Free and clear, life-changing wealth even at half the total. The remaining 50%, approximately $90 million, enters a conditional trust. This amount will be released to Morgan after 24 months if the following condition is met. Morgan must demonstrate a good faith effort toward family reconciliation with her adoptive parents, Diane and John Chen. The words felt like a betrayal, even though Robert had warned me this was coming. Richard looked up from the document. Good faith is specifically defined in the trust documents. Morgan must participate in at least 6 family mediation sessions over the 2-year period with a licensed family therapist. She must maintain civil communication defined as responding to contact from Diane or John within 1 week, and she must attend at least 4 family occasions per year, holidays, dinners, or similar gatherings. He set down the will and removed his reading glasses, looking at me directly. The trust is very clear that you are not required to forgive them, not required to forget what happened, not required to restore a full relationship or pretend everything is fine. You're only required to try reconciliation in a measured, documented way, to show up, to participate, to give it a genuine chance. And if I refuse, my voice came out hoarse. If you refuse to meet the condition, or if you begin the process but abandon it before the 24 months are complete, the remaining $90 million will be distributed to a list of established charities, primarily organizations supporting orphans and children who've lost parents. The executor spoke for the first time. The trust also specifies that if Diane and John refuse to participate in mediation, or refuse to attend family occasions to which you've invited them, you will have satisfied the good faith requirement. Their cooperation is requested, but not required. You only need to extend the invitation and make the effort. Richard leaned forward. Robert agonized over this structure for months. He wanted to give you everything unconditionally, but he also wanted to honor Catherine's values. She believed deeply in forgiveness and family healing and giving people chances to change. The condition isn't meant to punish you or force a reconciliation you don't want. It's meant to ensure you at least try for your own peace of mind before you walk away forever. He pulled out a handwritten note, clearly Robert's shaky script from his final weeks. He wrote this for me to share with you. I don't want Morgan consumed by anger the way Diane has been consumed for 25 years. I want them free. Whether that freedom is with their adoptive family or without them is Morgan's choice to make. But I want that choice to be conscious and intentional, not reactive. I want them to try healing to see if it's possible before they close that door permanently. I sat in silence processing. $90 million guaranteed. Another $90 million conditional on spending time with people who'd hurt me for 25 years. People who'd finally started trying to change, but who still couldn't fully acknowledge what they'd done. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately. I didn't need money with strings attached. $90 million was already more than I'd ever need. I could walk away, build my own life, never see Diane and John again, and still have generational wealth. But another part of me, the part that had just lost a father I'd barely known, the part that had spent 2 hours hearing about Catherine's beliefs and values, wondered if Robert was right. 6 therapy sessions and 4 family dinners a year for 2 years. Was that really so much to ask? Maybe I needed that closure, that genuine attempt at reconciliation, before I could truly move on. And what Catherine had wanted mattered. She was my mother, even though I'd never known her. She'd died bringing me into the world. Honoring her values felt important in a way I couldn't fully articulate. What if they refused to participate? I asked. Then you've met the condition, Richard said. Good faith effort includes extending the invitation. Their response is beyond your control. I nodded slowly, my mind racing through possibilities and implications. I need time to think about this. Of course. You have 60 days to decide whether to accept the conditional trust terms or to disclaim it and take only the unconditional 50%. The choice was mine. $90 million and freedom, or $180 million and the hardest 2 years of my life. Either way, Ryan would get nothing. And that thought brought me more satisfaction than I wanted to admit. I left Richard's office on June 15th with my mind spinning. $180 million. The number felt abstract, impossible to grasp. I'd spent the past months counting pennies, calculating whether I could afford fresh vegetables or should stick to canned. Now I was potentially one of the wealthiest people I knew. But the condition gnawed at me. I spent the next 2 weeks in turmoil. My lawyer was unequivocal in his advice when we met on June 20th. $90 million is life-changing money. You don't need the rest. Don't let a financial incentive force you into a relationship with people who abused you for decades. He had a point. $90 million was more than I could spend in several lifetimes. The additional $90 million was just numbers on a spreadsheet at that scale. My therapist took a different approach. I'd started seeing her in March using what little money I had because I'd realized I couldn't process everything that had happened alone. On June 22nd, she asked me the question that cut through all the noise. What do you want, Elena? Not what Robert wanted. Not what you think you should want. Not what's financially optimal. What do you actually want for yourself? I sat with that question for a long time. Finally, I answered honestly. I want to stop hurting. I want to stop waking up angry every morning. I want closure, real closure, not just walking away and pretending the past 32 years didn't happen. She nodded. Then maybe the money isn't really what you're deciding about. That night, I reread Robert's letter. Catherine believed in forgiveness and second chances. I thought about meeting him in the hospice, seeing the peace he'd found despite his regrets. He'd given me up, made what he considered the worst mistake of his life, and he'd still found a way to live with himself, to build a life, to make meaning from his pain. The condition wasn't about the money, I realized. It was about my own healing. Robert had given me $90 million unconditionally enough to never worry about money again. The additional $90 million was a prize for doing the hard emotional work of trying to heal regardless of whether that healing succeeded. On June 25th, I reached out to Sarah Mitchell for coffee. We met at a quiet cafe and I asked her something that had been on my mind. You have every reason to hate me. I fired you unjustly, destroyed your reputation, made your life harder when you were a single mother struggling to survive. How did you decide to work with me instead of just pursuing revenge? Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, considering. I spent 3 years bitter and angry. Those feelings poisoned everything: my relationship with Leo, my job prospects, my physical health. I had migraines constantly, couldn't sleep. When the NDA expired, I had a choice: stay angry or seek justice. Justice meant dealing with you even though you'd hurt me. She looked up at me. And you surprised me. You apologized. You helped. You testified on my behalf. People can change if they choose to. Not everyone does, but it's possible. Diane and John have shown small signs of change, I said quietly. Not enough, maybe, but some. The condition Robert set isn't really about them, Sarah said. It's about you not carrying this rage for the rest of your life. $90 million is the prize for your healing, not theirs. Whether they heal or change is honestly irrelevant. The question is whether you're willing to try to heal yourself. I thought about that for the rest of the week, about what healing might look like, about whether I could sit in a room with Diane and John for 6 therapy sessions without breaking down or walking out. About whether attending 4 family dinners a year for 2 years would destroy me or free me. On June 30th, I called Richard Thornton. I accept the full inheritance, including the conditional trust. He exhaled audibly. I'm glad. Robert hoped you would. I'll try the reconciliation process, I continued. Not for them. Not even for the money, really. For myself. Because I don't want to be like Diane, consumed by decades-old pain, unable to see past my own hurt, destroying relationships because I can't heal. Robert would be proud, Richard said, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. I'll set up the trust structure immediately and contact several qualified family therapists who specialize in complex family reconciliation. You'll have final say on who facilitates the mediation. I need something clear, I said. Trying doesn't mean succeeding. If, after honest effort, reconciliation isn't possible, if they can't change or won't change, or if the damage is just too deep, I've still met the condition. Right? Absolutely, Richard confirmed. The trust documents are explicit about this. Good faith effort is all that's required. You must show up, participate honestly and genuinely, attempt reconciliation. Their response is completely beyond your control. If they refuse to change, if they continue harmful patterns, if reconciliation proves impossible despite your best efforts, you've still satisfied the condition. I felt something loosen in my chest. Okay, then I'm ready. One more thing, Richard added. Robert included a personal note for me to share once you accepted. He wrote, "Tell Morgan that strength isn't refusing to try. Strength is trying even when you're terrified of being hurt again. Tell her Catherine would be proud." After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, which I could now afford to leave, could afford to replace with anything I wanted, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I made my decision. I would try to reconcile with Diane and John. Not because they deserved it, not because the money required it, but because I deserved peace. Because I deserved to know I'd done everything I could before I closed that door forever. But I had conditions of my own. I left my therapist's office on June 30th with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The decision was made. Now came the hard part: implementation. On July 5th, the formal inheritance transfer was completed. I sat in Richard Thornton's office and signed document after document, each one transferring another piece of Robert's legacy to me. Chen Industries, a $180 million commercial real estate enterprise that Robert had built over 3 decades. Investment portfolios, real estate holdings across 3 states, and $90 million in liquid assets immediately available. I was now wealthier and more powerful than my adoptive family had ever been. My first action was to establish the Catherine Morrison Foundation. Initial funding of $10 million focused on supporting single parents and adopted children, the people Catherine would have wanted to help. People like Sarah struggling alone. People like me caught between families and identities. My second action was strategic. Mitchell & Associates was struggling badly after the scandal. Client defections, legal settlements, operational chaos. The company was hemorrhaging money and at genuine risk of bankruptcy within 6 months. Despite everything, I didn't want to see it collapse. Too many good employees would lose their jobs. Too many clients would be hurt. On July 8th, I called a meeting with Diane, John, and the full board. My lawyer presented a term sheet I'd spent 3 days drafting. Morgan Chen will invest $15 million in Mitchell & Associates in exchange for 40% ownership and the CEO position. Current leadership, specifically Diane and John Chen, will step back to advisory roles with no operational authority. Ryan Mitchell is permanently banned from any involvement with the company in any capacity. The company will implement mandatory ethics training for all employees, transparent financial reporting with quarterly audits, and independent HR oversight reporting directly to the board. I watched their faces as my lawyer read the terms. John looked relieved. Diane looked like she was being asked to swallow glass. Patricia Walsh spoke first. "This is exactly what we need. Stable leadership, capital infusion, and clear accountability structures. I moved to accept the proposal." The vote was unanimous. They were desperate for capital and stable leadership, and I was offering both. Then I addressed Diane and John, directly speaking for the first time since my lawyer had begun the presentation. "I've accepted Robert's inheritance, including the condition to attempt reconciliation. I'm willing to try. But this happens on my terms, and those terms are non-negotiable." I pulled out a document I'd prepared and slid copies across the table to them. "First, you will attend all 6 mediation sessions without excuses or cancellations. No claiming you're too busy or that something came up. This is a priority or it doesn't happen at all." Diane nodded stiffly. John said, "Agreed." Second, you will issue a public apology at a company-wide meeting in front of all the employees who watched me be humiliated over the years. You will acknowledge that your treatment of me was unfair and that Ryan's behavior was enabled by your favoritism. Diane's hands clenched on the table. That's non-negotiable, I repeated. Those employees deserve to see accountability, and I deserve public acknowledgement of what happened. We'll do it, John said quietly, putting his hand over Diane's before she could object further. Third, you will establish a college fund for Leo Mitchell Sarah's son, your biological grandson. $50,000 held in trust until he's 18, and you will formally acknowledge him as family both privately and publicly. Diane's face went pale. You're asking us to claim Ryan's illegitimate... I'm asking you to take responsibility for your grandson, I said, my voice hard. A child who exists because your son abandoned his responsibilities. Leo is 3 years old and innocent. He deserves better than having his grandparents pretend he doesn't exist. John nodded slowly. We'll set up the fund. Fourth, you will sell the family home and downsize to something smaller. That house has too many painful memories for all of us. It's time to let it go. Diane made a small sound of protest, but John squeezed her hand. We've been discussing this already. The house is too big for just the two of us. And fifth, I said, meeting Diane's eyes, Ryan must issue a written apology to both me and Sarah, admitting to the fraud, the manipulation, and the harm he caused. If he refuses, you will cut off all financial support completely. No more paying his rent, his legal fees, his expenses. Nothing. You can't ask us to abandon our child, Diane said, her voice breaking. I'm not asking you to abandon him. I'm asking you to stop enabling criminal behavior. There's a difference. He's 35 years old. He committed crimes. He needs to face consequences and take responsibility. Your financial support has prevented that his entire life. The room was silent. I could see Diane struggling, her face twisted with competing emotions. John looked at her, then at me, then back at her. We'll deliver your terms to Ryan, John said finally. Whether he complies is his choice, but we'll make it clear that our support is contingent on his cooperation. The board meeting concluded with the formal vote on my investment and appointment. Unanimous approval. I was officially the CEO of Mitchell & Associates as of July 15th. The company issued an announcement that afternoon. We are pleased to welcome Morgan Chen as Chief Executive Officer. Morgan brings extensive experience leading our most successful branch and will guide the company through a period of restructuring and renewed growth. The industry response was overwhelmingly positive. Clients who'd been considering leaving sent emails expressing relief that there was finally competent leadership. Partners and vendors reached out to congratulate me. The business journals ran articles about my appointment, carefully noting that I was the daughter of Robert Chen, the late CEO of Chen Industries, but tactfully not mentioning the adoption or family drama. I heard through Patricia that Ryan had seen the announcement. He'd been sitting in his small apartment he'd moved out of my parents' house after they'd stopped paying his rent and had thrown his laptop across the room when he'd read the news, shattering the screen. On July 10th, Diane and John came to my office. It was strange seeing them there in what had once been my father's John's office, now mine. They stood awkwardly near the door until I gestured for them to sit. We agree to all your terms, John said. The mediation sessions, the public apology, Leo's college fund, selling the house. All of it. And Ryan? I asked. John's face tightened. We delivered your requirements. He was not receptive, but we told him that our financial support is contingent on his written apology. The choice is his. Diane looked like she'd aged 10 years. We just want a chance, Elena, a chance to try to make things right. We know we can't undo the past, but we want to try. I looked at them. These people who'd raised me, hurt me, finally begun to change. I felt a strange mix of victory and exhaustion. The first mediation session is scheduled for July 20th, I said. Don't be late. They agreed to everything. In less than 2 weeks, we'd sit in a therapist's office and try to repair what might be irreparable. But first, Ryan made one last, desperate move. My phone shattered the silence at 2 a.m. on July 18th. I fumbled for it in the darkness, heart already racing before I saw the caller ID. Diane. Calling at 2 a.m. "It's Ryan." Her voice was hysterical, broken by sobs. "They're in the hospital. They tried to—" The sentence dissolved into crying so intense I could barely understand her. "Please, you have to help. You have to drop everything. They left a note saying they couldn't live with the shame that you destroyed them." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Suicide. I felt an immediate flash of guilt had I pushed too hard, demanded too much, followed immediately by suspicion. This felt like Ryan, like exactly the kind of move they'd make. John took the phone from Diane. His voice was steadier but strained. "We're at Memorial Hospital emergency room. Please come. Whatever our differences, Ryan is still family. Still your sibling." I got dressed in the dark, hands shaking slightly as I pulled on jeans and a sweater. 20 minutes later, I was driving through empty streets toward the hospital, my mind cycling between guilt and doubt. The emergency room waiting area was harshly lit and nearly empty at 2:30 in the morning. Diane and John sat in plastic chairs, looking devastated. Diane's eyes were red and swollen. John's face was gray. Diane grabbed me the moment she saw me. "Tell the police you'll drop the charges. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. That's what Ryan needs. Hope you can save them." I pulled away gently but firmly. "Let me talk to the doctor first." I found a nurse at the station, a tired-looking woman in her 40s. I showed my ID and explained I was family, asking for information about Ryan's condition. She checked the chart and something shifted in her expression. Not concern exactly, but something closer to annoyance. "Patient is stable. Superficial lacerations to both wrists already bandaged. No medical danger." Superficial. The nurse glanced toward the waiting room where my parents sat, then lowered her voice. "Between you and me, we see a lot of genuine suicide attempts in this ER. This wasn't one. The cuts were horizontal, shallow, barely needed stitches. Textbook attention-seeking behavior. And the patient called 911 themselves was fully conscious when paramedics arrived. Real attempts don't usually give you time to make that call." My suspicion crystallized into certainty. "Can I see them?" The nurse hesitated. "Room 7. But the police want to interview them first, and the doctor needs to complete the psychiatric evaluation." I walked to room 7 and looked through the window. Ryan sat up in bed, bandaged wrists resting on the blanket, scrolling through their phone. They looked annoyed rather than traumatized, alive and alert and completely fine. A doctor approached a black woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an air of authority. Her badge read, "Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, ER attending." "Are you family?" she asked. "Sister. Adopted sister. Can you tell me what happened?" Dr. Okonkwo gestured for me to step away from the window. "Your sibling has superficial self-inflicted wounds consistent with a gesture rather than a genuine suicide attempt. In my 15 years in emergency medicine, I've seen both." This was theatrical. "Can you say that to my parents? They're convinced this is my fault for pursuing legal charges against Ryan." She nodded. "I think they need to hear the medical reality." We walked to the waiting room together. Diane and John stood immediately. Dr. Okonkwo addressed them professionally. "Your child is physically fine. However, I need to be clear about what we observed. The injuries were superficial, and the circumstances strongly suggest this was not a genuine suicide attempt, but rather a gesture possibly designed to elicit a specific response. We're recommending psychiatric evaluation, but there is no medical danger." Diane's face crumpled. "How can you say that they were desperate?" "I understand this is difficult," Dr. Okonkwo said firmly. "But mischaracterizing gestures as genuine attempts can actually enable harmful behavior patterns. Your child needs psychiatric help, not rescue from consequences." At that moment, Ryan appeared in the hallway. They'd checked themselves out against medical advice, still wearing the hospital gown but holding their phone and clothes. When they spotted me, I saw it a brief smirk before they composed their face into tragedy. They ran to our parents. "I'm so glad you're here. I was so scared and alone." Diane embraced them immediately, but John had seen that smirk. I'd seen it. And Dr. Okonkwo's assessment hung in the air like an indictment. "This was your final manipulation," I said clearly. "You thought this would make me back off, make them defend you again. But I see exactly what this is." Ryan's face shifted. The mask cracked and rage broke through. "You've taken everything from me. My job, my reputation, my family. What was I supposed to do?" "Face consequences," I said coldly. "Like an adult." I turned to my parents. John was staring at Ryan with an expression I'd never seen before, like he was finally seeing clearly after years of fog. Diane still clutched Ryan, but her embrace had loosened. "Our first mediation session is in 2 days," I said. "I'll be there. This," I gestured to Ryan, "doesn't change anything. They made their choices. Now, they live with them." I walked out of that hospital at 3:30 in the morning, leaving my parents standing in the fluorescent light with their golden child who'd finally shown them exactly who they'd created. Even they couldn't defend Ryan anymore. The mask had finally completely shattered. I left the hospital at 3:30 in the morning and drove home through empty streets. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind exhaustion and a strange sense of clarity. Ryan had played their final card, and it had failed. By August, Ryan's world had completely collapsed. The criminal trial for embezzlement was scheduled for October, and the prosecutor was confident given the overwhelming evidence. Sarah's civil lawsuit had settled for $500,000 a judgment against Ryan's future earnings since they had no current assets plus court-ordered child support of $2,500 per month. The Patterson lawsuit had been settled by the company to protect our reputation, but Ryan remained personally liable for $200,000 in restitution. Ryan's credit was destroyed. What few assets they'd had were seized to pay preliminary legal fees. They'd moved into a cheap studio apartment in a neighborhood far from anywhere they'd ever lived before working a food delivery gig to make rent. Every social connection had evaporated. Former friends stopped returning calls. Business contacts blocked their number. Even casual acquaintances wanted nothing to do with someone facing multiple felony charges. I heard through Jamie that Ryan had deleted their LinkedIn profile after the comments became too brutal. They'd tried dating apps but kept getting recognized and rejected. It was total social and professional death. In September, Ryan showed up at my parents' new condo. They'd sold the family home as I'd required downsizing to a 2-bedroom unit in a quiet complex. John told me about it later, his voice tired. Ryan had pounded on the door, demanding to be let in. "You can't let me lose everything, I'm your child." But something had changed in my parents. John had stood firm in a way I'd never seen before. "We love you, but we can't keep rescuing you from your own decisions. We'll pay for therapy if you want it. We'll help you rebuild your life in healthy ways, but no more money for lawyers, no more bailouts." Diane had added, her voice painful but resolved. "You need to rebuild your life through honest work, not manipulation. That's the only way forward for you," Ryan had exploded. "This is her fault. Elena poisoned you against me. You used to love me." John had shaken his head. "No. You did this to yourself. We enabled it by never holding you accountable, by protecting you from every consequence. That ends now. We still love you, but we won't participate in your destruction anymore." Ryan had stormed out and hadn't contacted them since. The trial in October lasted 1 week. I followed it through updates from Patricia Walsh, who attended as a board observer. The evidence was overwhelming: bank records, emails, witness testimony, the falsified documents. Ryan's lawyer had advised taking a plea deal rather than risking a jury trial. The plea was 18 months in federal prison, minimum security, followed by 5 years of probation and full restitution to all victims. At sentencing, the judge had made a statement that Patricia recited to me over the phone. "You were given every advantage in life, a loving family, a position in a successful company, countless opportunities. You squandered all of it through entitlement and dishonesty. Perhaps this time will teach you the accountability that your family and circumstances never did. Ryan entered federal prison on November 2nd. I didn't attend the trial or the sentencing. I'd already moved on emotionally, was already deep into the work of running the company and attending mediation sessions with my parents. When the notification came that Ryan's sentence was final, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no vindication. Just finality. The person who'd tormented me for decades, who'd systematically undermined my relationship with my parents, who'd destroyed Sarah's career and abandoned his own child, was now just someone who'd made terrible choices and was facing the natural consequences. The story had reached its conclusion, and I discovered I had no emotional investment in the ending. This was what closure felt like, I realized. Not dramatic or cathartic, not satisfying in the way I'd once imagined justice would be. Just done. Ryan would spend 18 months in prison, then 5 years rebuilding a life from nothing. Maybe they'd learn something. Maybe they'd change. Maybe they'd come out the same person they'd always been, just older and angrier. It wasn't my problem anymore. I had a company to run, employees depending on me, clients to serve. I had mediation sessions with my parents, slowly and painfully working through decades of hurt. I had the Catherine Morrison Foundation to develop Sarah and Leo, to support a life to build that wasn't defined by family dysfunction. Ryan's story was over as far as I was concerned. Mine was just beginning. December 24th arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp cold that made the city look pristine. Exactly 1 year since I'd been thrown out into the snow with 2 garbage bags and nowhere to go. I stood in my corner office, the one that had belonged to Diane and John, now redecorated with warm woods and modern touches, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk approached. The view was the same, but everything else had changed. Mitchell and Associates had transformed under my leadership. Revenue was up 35%. The toxic culture had been replaced with transparency and respect. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. We'd landed 3 major new clients who'd heard about our commitment to ethical practices. Last month, the Business Journal had named me Entrepreneur to Watch. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. I'd restructured the company to prioritize ethics over profit at all costs. Weekly all-hands meetings where anyone could raise concerns. An open-door policy that I actually honored. An anonymous ethics hotline that reported directly to an independent board committee. This was the kind of company Robert had built, the kind Catherine would have been proud of. I thought about the journey from that tiny studio apartment to here, and it felt simultaneously impossible and inevitable. I'd completed 5 of the 6 required mediation sessions with Diane and John. The progress had been messy and painful and slow. Diane still struggled to separate me from her painful past, but she was trying. She went to individual therapy weekly, now had learned to name her feelings instead of projecting them onto me. At Thanksgiving dinner, our 3rd required family gathering, she'd said something that had brought tears to my eyes. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I understand now that my pain doesn't excuse hurting you. You deserved better." They weren't perfect words, but they were real ones. John had been more consistent. He sent me weekly emails, now small updates about his life, terrible dad jokes, articles he thought I'd find interesting. We were rebuilding a relationship bit by bit, brick by careful brick. We'd never be close the way some families were. But there was honesty now. Peace instead of performance. And that was enough. The therapist had told me privately that regardless of whether we completed the 6th session, the family had already met the spirit of the reconciliation requirement. The trust would release the remaining $90 million in 2 months. But I discovered I didn't particularly care about the money anymore. I cared about the healing. At 6 o'clock, guests began arriving at my new home. I'd bought a house in a nice neighborhood 3 months ago, the first home that was truly completely mine. It was smaller than my parents' old house, but filled with light and warmth. Sarah arrived first with Leo, who was 4 now, and called me Aunt Morgan without any prompting. He ran straight to the Christmas tree, eyes wide at the presents underneath. Jamie from HR came next, carrying a bottle of wine and a homemade pie. She'd become a genuine friend through everything, someone I trusted completely. Marcus, the CFO, arrived with his wife. Richard Thornton came moving slowly but with clear eyes and a warm smile. And then Diane and John arrived, standing awkwardly in the doorway until I welcomed them in. The house filled with conversation and laughter. Leo played with new toys under the tree while adults gathered in the kitchen sharing food and stories. I watched Diane and Sarah have an awkward but civil conversation, Diane apologizing for how the company had treated her meeting her grandson for the first time with visible emotion. John got down on the floor with Leo, his grandfather energy emerging naturally as they built a tower of blocks together. This wasn't the family I'd been born into. It wasn't the family I'd been adopted into. This was the family I'd built, imperfect people trying to be better connected by choice and healing, rather than blood or obligation. After dinner, I stepped outside onto the porch. Snow was falling softly, coating the world in quiet white. The door opened behind me and Diane joined me. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded. "Thank you for giving us another chance," she said quietly. "I know we didn't deserve it." "Maybe not." I agreed. "But Robert was right, I needed to try for my own healing. And you've done the work. You've shown up. That matters." We stood in silence, watching the snow fall. Then Diane said something that made my breath catch. "Your mother, Catherine, would be proud of who you've become. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you that sooner." My eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. That means more than you know." We went back inside together into the warmth and light and sound of people who'd chosen to be here. Late in the evening, after everyone had left, I sat by the Christmas tree with just the twinkling lights for company. I held the photograph Richard had given me months ago, Catherine and Robert young and in love and full of hope. "I think I finally understand what you wanted for me," I whispered to their frozen smiles. "Not revenge, not even justice. Just freedom to choose my own path and peace to walk it." I set the photo on the mantel where it belonged, then looked around at the home I'd built, the life I'd created, the future I was shaping. I thought briefly about Ryan in prison, hoped they'd find their own path to growth. But that was their journey now, not mine. My journey was here, a successful company run with integrity, relationships based on honesty, a life free from others' dysfunction. The clock struck midnight. Christmas Day. I smiled, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, genuine joy. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was real. Some stories end with revenge. Mine ended with redemption, not theirs but mine. And that I realized was the greatest victory of all. So that's Elena's story. From the daughter who was never quite good enough, thrown out in the snow on Christmas Eve, to the CEO who rebuilt not just a company but her entire life. She didn't just win against those who hurt her, she freed herself from the need for their validation entirely. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking this journey with me. Stories like Elena's remind us that sometimes the people who are supposed to love us unconditionally are the ones who hurt us most. But they also show us that we're not defined by how others treat us. We're defined by how we choose to respond, how we rebuild, and who we become when we finally break free. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family? The one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and this community is here to listen. And here's the real question. Do you think Elena made the right choice by attempting reconciliation with Diane and John? Should she have just taken the $90 million and walked away, or was Robert right that healing required her to try? There's no wrong answer here. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share stories like this every week, stories about people who faced impossible situations and found their way through. Stories about justice, redemption, and the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to sacrifice. And if you know someone who needs to hear Elena's story, someone who's struggling with family dysfunction or feeling like they'll never be enough, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward freedom. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, you are not defined by the family you were born into. You are defined by the life you choose to build and the person you decide to become. I'll see you in the next story.